Welcome, everybody, to the Town of Fairfield Fiscal Year 2020 Capital Planning Summit. We'd like to welcome our guests from the Board of Selectmen and from the RTM and from the Education Administration here. We appreciate that. Tonight's role is to go through capital planning for the town for the next number of years. So this is a long-term planning exercise that's very important as we plan out what our debt service is and what capital projects we have over the next 10 to 20 years. I'm going to ask Mr. Mayor, who does a lot of the heavy lifting on this, to say the Pledge of Allegiance for us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And everybody can take their seat. Before we get started, I'm going to ask if it's okay with my colleagues for a moment of personal privilege. It's funny. Campaigns are a funny thing. Public is a funny thing during campaign season, particularly in heavily charged times like this. But my back has been the most talked about thing around for quite some days since I had to skip a debate. First of all, I want to thank Nancy Lefkowitz. And as I said, Nancy and I are not competitors. For the selectman spot, we are two people that are running for the same office. But I've had the privilege of meeting Nancy's daughter, and I think Nancy's a fine lady, and she and I worked very closely on that debate, and it was unfortunate that it couldn't come up. Publicly, though, to state my back, I have 3 herniated discs in my back, and it's the prognosis is good, but it is painful. So I'm working through that. And the reason I say that is it was very nice on the internet. A lot of longtime friends and people reached out to me and said, of genuine concern when they realized I couldn't go to a debate and couldn't go to a Board of Finance meeting, which is very much unlike me. Including colleagues on this board reached out, and that was very thoughtful. But for the first time ever, I had the other opposite side of it with what I would refer to as internet trolls who get real bouts of courage when they sit behind a keyboard, but don't have the courtesy to say it to your face. And that was very disappointing to see that in the town of Fairfield and to see that people react like that, particularly people that hold themselves up to be paragons of virtue. And they very much upset my wife, and that was uncalled for. And the other thing is you don't want to upset my wife because she grew up in New Jersey, and that can end very poorly for you. But I did not appreciate that. I thought it was uncalled for. I will not forget it, but I also will not partake in it. And I would much rather remember the people that were kind and thoughtful and reached out with a good word, and I'd like to thank them for that, as well as my colleagues here. So I think we need to treat each other with a little bit more respect. And remember that just because you hide behind a keyboard doesn't mean you can say anything you want. These are volunteer positions. We do not get paid to be here. And I think everybody should know that. So my apologies for being in my soapbox, but it's the first time I've ever experienced it. And I did want to address it because I like to actually stand up here and say that and stand behind my words as opposed to behind a keyboard. So, with that said, I look forward to tonight every year, and I hope we have a good discussion. It's going to be a wide-ranging discussion, and as I said, it's long-term planning. I'd like to thank Mr. Tetro for being here. I'd like to recognize Mrs. Iacona and Mrs. Lefkowitz from the RTM for being here, as well as my colleagues on the Board of Finance, as well as the Education Administration, and members of the Board of Education for being here. Thank you so much. So I'm going to kick it over to Mr. Mayor, unless any of my colleagues have anything else they want to follow up on or say.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and glad you're with us today.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, we'll just, the document's a little bit changed from last year. I'll go through it, and you can be obviously, like always, interactive. People speak up whenever they want. Starting with Exhibit 1, a 3-part exhibit. It's got the Board of Ed on the top, middle is the town, and then the bottom is the grand total. So you can see that for the period, for the fiscal years ending 2020 through 2029. And as we know, that there will be more things created in the future, right? I mean, things that are going to come up that it would be added to this, but this is, I want to be very clear, the intent here with respect to the request that went out to the department heads was give us everything that you think that's important that you will need. So this should be all inclusive.
Hey, Bob.
Sir.
Let me thank you, number one, for all the work that went into this. Number two, as it relates to this, can you step us back? Okay, so it's all inclusive. How were the estimates put together that are
Well, we're going to get to Exhibit 2.
Okay.
So Exhibit 1 there you can see just very quickly, you see, so the total for the town, for the Board of Ed is 56 million. The town actually exceeds the Board of Ed, which is not usual. 84 million for a total of 100. WPCA is not included on this sheet, okay? That's important to note. Go to Exhibit 2. This is a new exhibit. You can see it's Exhibit 2 and Exhibit 2A. Exhibit 2 is non-recurring capital by year that it's in the first in the project. That's the year of request, not the year of completion. And you can see the basis of the pricing. We asked everyone to tell us where were they in their in the sophistication, the finalization of what they thought might be pricing. We started out asking people for percentage estimates, but like how the percentage confidence, 80% confidence level, 90% confidence level. That was not, people just were a little hesitant to try to put numbers to it. So these are the reasons. So theoretically, every document has a reason, or every project, excuse me, from comparison to past projects, department estimate, vendor quotes, architect estimate, engineer's estimate. So you...
Bob, how did you, this is what I was getting at. This is good, thank you. How did you get to the out years? What was the escalator that was used? Because that's been really the biggest problem on these costs moving forward.
I think Ms. Nolfi's and Sachs was in the audience, but I think we asked them to accelerate 2 to 3% inflation factor.
Please come on up, Ms. Nolfi. Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Connie Saxel. I'm the internal auditor for the town of Fairfield. I work in the finance department. And yes, this is a new exhibit that we prepared for you. And what we wanted this year was to give you a comfort level as for the basis of the project costs. And what I did was I asked all the department heads to provide me with their best basis for how they determined the cost of these projects. And of course, going out 10 years is difficult, but we did ask the department heads to give us a 2% escalator for the costs, so we could at least work along with cost of living adjustments.
Why? Yeah, what was 2%? That was just kind of an assumed cost of living.
That was an assumption based on cost of living projections and increases.
Okay, so you guys gave the escalators of 2%, so it's
Correct.
not that they went to their vendors and said...
Well, some department heads did go to vendors and get vendor estimates, vendor quotes. They did
For
ask
those years?
for those years,
Okay.
and they did provide me with those pricing for those costs for those projects.
Okay, thank you. That's been one of our biggest challenges
Yes.
year after year.
Yes, we didn't want any surprises down the road, and
Yeah,
we're trying to
well-
get our best pricing for these projects.
Okay.
Yeah, though we know some will change. So that's Exhibit 2, both non-recurring. So then you go to Exhibit...
Can we take a moment? Does anybody have any questions on what they're seeing on Exhibit 2? All right, yeah, Mr. Walsh.
Some of these projects are listed as new projects. Are we going to get some type of summary of what each of those new projects are?
Well,
Yes.
all the
sorry,
department heads are here tonight to respond to any questions you have about definition and if they're not here tonight, they don't get approved, ever.
Well, let me just throw one out there that I don't even understand what it means.
I saw that too.
That would be Mr. Calabrese response?
I don't think you mean a snowmobile for $105,000.
Good evening, Anthony Calabrese, Director of Parks and Recreation. Yeah, correct. It's a showmobile, not a typo, meaning snowmobile. A bunch of the surrounding towns around us have what I would call portable stages. Basically, they fold up like the back of an 18-wheeler. You can move them throughout town. You could plug into power. You can do concerts, special events, graduations, all those types of things. Fairfield doesn't have one. So right now we rely a lot on the Sherman Green to do a lot of our special events. Jennings Beach is another location. So when we were going through the strategic planning process and meeting with the committees, one of the things they said is, you've got to offer more community events throughout the town, and a showmobile, I think, is a perfect way to do that. We're seeing, Norwalk's had one for years. Stratford has one. I put it out a couple of years. We were going to try to beta test it this year. This upcoming year, by renting one from a surrounding town, just to try to get an idea of, will this work? Is it the right kind of model? All that. So that's what it is.
That's still the plan?
That's still the plan.
Can I just ask?
Absolutely. This is free flowing. Anybody?
So sorry, the showmobile, you're saying this is the cost for renting it?
No, that's the cost to purchase one. I believe it's $165,000. I don't have the number in front of me. That's the cost to purchase it. We would own it at that point. We can rent it out to other towns, to other organizations.
Okay.
When I presented that idea, I presented all these ideas, obviously, to my Parks and Rec Commission. In the audience, we had Marlene Batista from the Pink Pledge. They rent one out 3 to 5 times a year. So she was thrilled with this idea that they wouldn't have to go through another vendor and could potentially work with the town on using ours. Obviously, I believe the Board of Ed also rents one for some of our graduations. But there's a bunch of different revenue ideas that we can do with it.
So did you say that you were thinking of renting it for a year just to see what it generated in terms of revenue or the usage, et cetera?
Yeah, so
and what's the cost of a rental?
For example, like the town of Stratford rents theirs out for $1,000 for, I believe it's a 3 to 4 hour block. I'd have to double check that off again. But yeah, the thought would be to rent it for maybe 2 or 3 times, maybe a few more for this upcoming summer, just to see if it is something that we want to invest in. And as you guys know, the waterfall chart moves around a lot. Things go on there, things come off. So if we rent this out this year and see that, the 3 or 4 times we've done it, this is really not what we thought it was going to be, we would remove it from the chart.
Can I ask one more question? Are you looking at this as a revenue producer as well for the town? You'd rent it to groups, for example, and they would pay the town revenue for that?
Yep, on top of us using it ourselves, correct.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? Go ahead.
Calabrese, while you're up here, can you go over your other items that you have here that are on this list? The next one being, I guess, the post-tension tennis courts in Tomlinson.
Yep, so
A couple of those coming up over the years, so.
They're at Woods and Tomlinson.
Yep. So as you guys know, we recently put in 2 sets of post-tension concrete tennis courts. The Knapp's courts at Fairfield Ward High School, or Blake courts, sorry, the ones right on Melville. And we just, the Board of Ed just did Ludlow Middle School. So post-tension concrete is, it's been around for a while, but it's starting to catch on with municipalities. You get a 20-year warranty against any cracking. You get a 10-year warranty on all the lines. Right now, with an asphalt court, while you're paying less up front for the court, the initial court itself, we've got to refinish them every 2 years. And Tomlinson's one of these courts that's finally reached the point where it needs to be completely ground up and redone. So it's a prime example of one that we should go over to post-tension concrete. We have 4 courts there. So the ones that I have proposed on here over the next couple of years, I believe Dwight is the other one. So there's 2, but both of those locations, Tomlinson and Dwight, both have 4 courts. I wouldn't look to do this at a single court location. I think it's more cost effective, like a Gould Manor where there's 1 tennis court, to continue to do that 1 asphalt. Those are fairly inexpensive when it's 1 location. Between Tomlinson and Dwight, we can spend anywhere every 2 years between $30,000 to $60,000 refinishing them. So it does get expensive, but that's where we are.
And then, did you just say that you have paid for
Board of Ed did both.
Board of Ed paid both.
Yep.
And they were not in non-recurring capital, or they were?
They were. To my memory, they were.
Okay. And then you seem to have, the next one other than that, that's on your list, would be the Jackie Durrell Pavilion upgrades. What is that? Be for $100,000?
Mainly kitchen upgrades. I couldn't tell you how old the equipment is in the kitchen itself right now, but we definitely need to re-outfit that kitchen. Everything from the new hood to the stove that's in there to the freezers, everything is dated and needs to be replaced. So.
Go ahead, Mr. Walsh.
And then the next one would be the splash pad replaced. So we already have a splash pad at Lake Mohegan, and for $100,000, it's going to be need to replace in the 2021, 2022 approximate time period.
Yeah, that splash pad was put in 1995. So as you could tell, just doing the math there, it's at the end of its useful life and does need to be replaced. I wouldn't be looking to expand it. It's essentially just replacing the size of, maybe replacing some of the structures, but keeping it within the same footprint that's there.
Okay. And then the Pine Creek Park Playground?
It's one of the best kept secrets in Fairfield right there.
Not anymore.
If you go down there, that's a park probably from 1974. Okay. The neighborhood loves it, but it's one of those things that it needs to be replaced, and it probably should have been replaced a while ago. And that's going to be a recurring trend you'll see over the next several years is playgrounds that need to be replaced. Tunxus Hill is another one that I have on the list that needs to be replaced. I thought there was one other one. Anyway, the playgrounds are all the same, pretty much the same time frame. So
okay. And then I see that there is a South Benson dock renovation for $600,000 in 2021/22, but I also see a South Benson Marina amount between you and DPW, your group and DPW, in 2022 and 23. So can you explain what's needed to be done for the $600,000, which is not a new number?
No,
it's been a hold number.
Yep.
And the $8 million, which for this year's a new number.
Yep. So as you guys, I'm sure, have heard, the Parks and Rec Commission has a subcommittee, a marina subcommittee. They've been going back and forth with some redesign plans. A complete redesign, and potentially the one that they've been looking at, rough estimate from the engineers, to completely replace is about $8 million. So I wanted to put that number on there in case they do go that route. I don't want it to be a surprise that, hey, we'd like to spend $8 million to try to get $8 million approved. The $600,000 number, as you mentioned, is a placeholder, has been a placeholder, and continues to just kind of move down the waterfall chart as we go on. And I would call that more of a safety net than anything, because we do have to we've got to make some upgrades down there at some point. And I think once the commission and the bodies decide which way they want to go, whether they go a full remodel or if we go in pieces, that $600,000 will be a good starting point for us to replace a few of the docks that are down there.
So it's kind of double counting,
It is.
which is fine for purposes of this exercise. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I guess the question was, why wasn't it just all combined into the $8 million, and we'd figure out which route we were going to go down at?
Yeah, you could do it that way.
We could always do that.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Next one, I guess, for you would be, that's new. That's that. Yeah. So more tennis courts in Fairfield Woods in 2022/23.
Yep.
Same thing. Another playground at Tunxus Hill this time.
Correct.
For the same reasons, the age and things like that.
Yep.
Tennis center light replacement in 2022/23.
Right, so tennis center light replacement has been one of these ones that has bounced around a while. If I'm not mistaken, those lights were put in the early to mid 80s, 1980s. So those lights are roughly 40 years old. DPW is always down there replacing, ballasts, lights. We've added a sixth court down there when they remodeled the building, the tennis center that's down there. So we don't have light coverage on that court currently. So this includes adding another pole with the additional lights, upgrading to more LED friendly, environmentally friendly and neighborhood friendly lights. Our tennis concessionaire, pays a lot of money for that building, and unfortunately, when lights go out, it's tough to, have people paying to play there. So we do have to get it done at some point.
All right. The next one, I guess, is the Dugiela softball field lights. So they're planning on putting outdoor lights there in 23-24.
Well, this is that is the thought. Obviously, I know that one's not going to come.
That's going to be a fun discussion.
That's not going to
Good
come
luck
without
with
any
that,
pushback, exactly. But what makes that one a little more palatable, I think, for the bodies is that Little League is willing to front majority of that cost. So I've pushed it out just because, again, I know the climate up there and the fight we had just to get the field in. But that is one that, again, we potentially have funding to cover that from a third party. So,
Representative Lefkowitz, did you have a question relative to this?
I did, thank you. Hello.
Hello.
I was pleased to hear you mention LED-friendly lights, and are there other practices of sustainability that you've factored in, like the courts that you talked about, that special material?
So, well, the tennis courts are just really, that's concrete. So nothing other than the slope of them, helps with the drainage. And the playgrounds, we are not. I wasn't planning on upgrading any of the surfacing. That's where we would be able to do some other friendly things. But right now we are a wood fiber, bed for the surfacing. So I don't see anything else going that way.
Okay. And then the costs, do they include the replacement cost for all of these, or are they just purely the materials and then the new?
So for the playgrounds, that's all in. Those are all in costs. And it's the same with the tennis court costs. The tennis court costs are based on cooperative purchasing, which doesn't necessarily, it doesn't have to go out to bid. It's already been bid at the national level. So those numbers are really firm. I mean, we know what the cost is going to be to remove the courts and replace them. That's what the number is. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Anybody else? Ms. Esma? Mr. DeWitt, you go ahead.
Just a quick question for Ms. Saxel. I like the new exhibit. This is an extraction of the data from Exhibit 7, correct?
Correct.
So everything is, so
Yes.
Exhibit 7 is the big
That's
waterfall.
Correct.
Okay, that's great, thank you.
All right. Ms. Esma. Then
Thank
we'll
you.
come back
Hi,
to
Anthony.
Mr. Walsh.
Anytime we're doing an LED replacement for the older technology, is that a longer replacement timeline with those? Although it's hard to get much longer than.
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to get 40 years out of the
19
next set
years.
of lights. The thought would be, well, the hope would be that we would get close to that again, but I couldn't guarantee that.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Mr. Walsh.
Just on that, so they're LED lights, so the upfront cost will be more, but the assumption is you'll save energy and things like that over time, and the bulbs will last
Correct.
longer and things like that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The Jennings Beach concession upgrades, are those similar upgrades to the kitchen, or what upgrades?
More
are they?
exterior upgrades, because we don't have any, other than I think the hood inside the concession there. The concessionaire is responsible for all the gear, all the equipment that's inside. But this was more of exterior fixtures. Right now, as you know, we've got a cinder block building down there. I'd like to upgrade the look of that. And we were hoping to go something similar to what we have at Lake Mohegan. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that upgrade that we did, a while ago, but it's nice looking. So yeah, really aesthetics.
Okay. On the second page of
Do you
exhibit.
have a question,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ms. Marley?
I did have a question.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Please, go ahead.
Jump in.
Yeah, just in the middle of it. So.
Okay. I just want to go to 2019-20 and then 2020-21. You have the golf course renovation for $100,000 each for each of those 2 years. Is this the end of the 10-year plan? Is that what we're getting to?
Yes, this
Yay,
year
that's
will be
great.
the last of the
For-
10-year.
But remember,
request.
the deal was, he's been honest, saying that he thinks it's got to continue, but it's probably got to go into your operating budget in future years.
Correct.
rather
That's
than
what we
to the
would-
investment.
So that was my, thank you. So that was my next question. So you've got this here, and then we're going to continue to renovate, but it's not going to be on the,
As much, and we would
Wonderful.
try to put it in the operating budget
Right.
for the following year, yeah.
2021,
Okay.
2022.
21, 22.
21, 22. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Continuing on page 2 of Exhibit 2, some of your other new projects, one being in 2020/21, the Roger Ludlow Middle School turf. Can you explain what that is? Is that just replacing all the turf that's currently there because it's reached the end of its useful life?
No, so we don't have any turf there right now. So Roger Ludlow Middle School.
Oh, the middle school, that's correct.
Right,
yeah.
so that's the lower
Yep.
field behind the middle school on Onkawa.
Yep.
Right now is completely grass fields. Doesn't drain as well as we'd like it to drain. It is a Parks and Recreation field. Does get a lot of use by the high school and the middle school, obviously. But the one thing that we're lacking, and you guys have heard me say it a lot, is field space. And this has been a fight every year. We are lacking field space in Fairfield. So the thought is to try to alleviate that by putting in more turf fields. We have enough space there to put in one full-size soccer field and a small-sided soccer field. It would be to turf the entire area down there and put lights in as well, which would extend the hours that we can use it. If we match the high school and we were going to 10 o'clock, that obviously gives us a few extra hours every night of the week to put other teams on there, whether they're recreational teams or they're the high school teams. I know the football team is always looking for space. There was practices the other day on the brand new tennis courts over at Ludlow that people sent me pictures of, teams practicing football on the tennis courts because the grass fields were closed. Not an ideal situation. It was sunny out, but we had enough rain where fields got closed. So that's the big project that I want to propose for next year. And again, the nice part about this is I've approached the youth groups, Fairfield Youth Football, Fairfield Youth Lacrosse, and FUSA, which is the travel soccer organization. All three sat together, and all three committed to giving money to this project and additionally fundraising towards it. I've also been in talks with the Board of Education. The football team is the only one right now that has approached me when they heard of this project and said, hey, we want in, we will fundraise for this project as well.
Anthony, if they solve kind of the carcinogen concerns related to
So
this,
what I did here was I held a number of $4 million for the project. If we went with crumb rubber, the project would run roughly $3.5 million. But I looked at what Westport just did. Westport just went with, they just replaced 4 turf fields in town there. 3 of them are going with this new, it's called TPE. That it's the most expensive fill that you could possibly go with right now, and it adds an additional $2.80 per square foot onto the project. So when you add that in, we're right at $4 million. So I put the higher number in here, and essentially the way I wanted to present this to the boards was, look, you can go $3.5 million for crumb rubber. We can go $4 million if TPE is the way you want to go. But to answer your question, the state of Connecticut, the health departments of across the United States are still saying that there is no health concern with crumb rubber. So it's just a matter of what the appetite is in town. But for me, from the recreation side of things, having those turf fields, whether it's TPE or crumb rubber, is the most important part, because then we can still have fields that we can play on.
thank you for the clarification. Go ahead. We can
Okay.
continue
Is
down.
that the field that was torn up with vandalism a
It
couple
was
years ago?
in
Okay.
2017.
Great, okay. I think you talked about the Southport Marina, and then you have, the only last one I think you have on this list is the South Pine Creek Sullivan Field Turf Field for $4 million in 2022/2023, which is similar to the number that you have for the Roger Ludlow Middle
Different
School
size,
turf.
different size field, and I only did the crumb rubber in that number. So if I was kind of playing that one by ear. If the town decided they wanted to go TPE for Ludlow Middle School, then obviously I'm going to have to update that $4 million number to include the TPE price as opposed to crumb rubber. But I essentially priced that out at the crumb rubber price. And again, that was using the CREC program, which is it's bid nationally. It's a regional cooperative purchasing group.
And which is it? Obviously, there's a football field down there.
Yeah, so Sullivan Field's the football field, and right next to it is what we call South Pine Creek Soccer. So it's two side-by-side fields. The thought, again, is just to turf both. No grass strip in the middle because that would be a maintenance nightmare. And then put lights on. We have lights right now on the Pop Warner field, but I would include it in this number is putting lights onto the soccer field as well, just so we get an additional field.
Well, thank you for that presentation. You have most of the new stuff, so sorry it took so long. Thanks.
Appreciate that. And let me ask a question. Because we've heard some rumors about these reports after they've been submitted to us from prior years. Is everything that you've been discussing included on your report here?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Mr. Chair, do you want to have the other department heads come up
do.
and go through, like, do this?
I do, and then we'll continue on.
Yeah.
Chris has a question himself,
Yeah.
so let's go over to Mr. DeWitt.
Now, I just have a comment for Mr. Calabrese. You know, the opening statements our CFO made was he went out to all the department heads and said, put everything in. And clearly you put everything in. And I'll tell you what, I appreciate it. And I very much appreciate seeing a $4 million number that could turn to 3 rather than a 3 that could turn to 4. So thank you very much for
You're
that.
welcome.
Just don't have it turn to 5.
Just don't have, yeah, right. Like your other project.
All right. Mr. Mayor, I'll let you steer as to who should be next. Thank you very much for being up here.
Thank you.
Yeah, why don't we go with DPW and conservation?
Mr. Mayor, can you explain it? Mr. Carey will come up, I'm sure. Given the challenges in the DPW department over the last few months, how was this put together from the DPW perspective? How was this reworked? How was this redone, given that?
Well, as you know, one of the reasons that we delayed this a month or a month and a half was because there's a change in staff, both at the Board of Ed and the town, and Brian's been working, Brian's there with me in the evenings now. We're working to catch up to do the best he can to get a handle on everything that's out there.
Okay, so when you say do the best you can, how comfortable are you guys with what you're about to present, given with everything that's going on? That's
Mr. Carey, Mr. Hurley. And actually, that's, Laura's there, Bill is there, so it's not like we don't, they're the ones that,
Great.
yeah, so we don't, so that intellect is.
Well, what you're saying is there is some continuity.
Yes,
This isn't starting from scratch.
correct,
But obviously, this is not the most ideal situation.
yeah. But I think we
So what's our comfort level?
got everything we need.
So I've been in the, obviously I've been in the capital planning process in the past, and, we've looked at the past 2008, obviously during the same time I've, had multiple discussions with all of the department managers, Bill, obviously Laura Pooley, and, I put out requests to James Ryan and basically everyone in the department to really, again, try to capture everything that we possibly can and to put it on this list. Again, things are, obviously fluid in our capital program based on need. Things come up, emergencies. It's hard to predict, especially going out. Again, we've kind of seen the difficulty in trying to capture costs years out, especially in the economic situation we find ourselves in. So we've done our best to come up with costs that we think are, first of all, we've done our best to put all of the projects that we think are ready to go out to permit and bid. A lot of them are in that process already. So things that you see that are ready to go for bonding in, let's say, February, March timeframe, those are things that are already being permitted right now. And you've seen them again year after year. But we can go through this. I don't know if Bill has anything to say on that front. But again, we did work closely to kind of capture all of the cost. But one thing I would like to say is that, You know, I obviously have a different idea of the way some of these things should be done, especially with the building maintenance projects and trying to encumber them in the operating budget when there's a lot of need throughout town for some of these smaller projects. We get calls, there's a lot of requests. Trying to manage that within the operating budget, it's very hard when they come up. You will see that there are some numbers we added in here to kind of address some of those issues. I've also actually talked to James Ryan, who is the building maintenance facility manager, to try to nail down projects that he's been getting requests from all the departments, whether it be fire, police, the libraries. You know, sometimes people are asking us to do things for them, thinking that we just have a kitty of money basically sitting in an operating budget somewhere. And one of the things that's been difficult is that, you know, obviously my predecessors have made, you know, promises or, you know, agreements with people, and I'm trying my best to accommodate all those. But again, I'm not working on my budget, and there's agreements been made. Some of that should be kind of moved over to a capital, you know, type of account, in my opinion. Things like boilers and stuff that has 20-year life cycle. But it's hard to encumber that in the operating budget without it completely moving the needle when we come in here for budget requests. It's also things that are easy to cut out of the operating budget, but the need doesn't go away, and we find ourselves in these spots where we're kind of really running around town with like the Dutch boy trying to solve some of our issues and finding money. But I know Bill had
I've
some.
I've heard stories from certain firemen that there's been a lot of that's gone on in firehouses around town, to be honest with you. That there's heavy needs in a lot of the older firehouses that have been put off for years and years.
Absolutely, and I will say that that is a function of, you know, kind of whether it fits into a capital planning process or into the operating budget. But when you talk about having, you know, $30,000 or $40,000 projects, you know, and trying to, you know, if the boiler breaks, you know, it's been there for 30 years, and we come in and we look at it and say, yeah, there's no way to fix this anymore. It needs to be replaced. You know, we're kind of stuck in the middle of year, you know, trying to fix that within the operating budget, which causes issues for us. So, you know, we did put some money in there for facility maintenance. I know.
Is the facility maintenance that you put in here fully representative of what needs to be done?
No, so that is one of the things that I'm trying to nail down with Jim Ryan currently, because there's projects that exceed $100,000 and there's projects that are below $100,000, but there's a lot of those below $100,000
Well,
projects.
let me ask a question about that. And I'm going to stick with it just because it's a sticky wicket right now. The firehouses themselves, right? A lot of times we approach the school renovation projects as, you know, one big project to do an individual school. Should we be approaching the firehouses similarly and saying we've got to do, you know, 12 things to Firehouse 1, the total cost of doing that is $600,000, right? And that is a project for that firehouse.
Yes.
Right. So, because there were things that I've been told about that I had never heard of before, and it was almost like, well, you know, the town bodies haven't given the green light on this. Well, the town bodies haven't given the green light on this because, quite frankly, we didn't know about it.
It's hard to encumber those types of projects within the operating budget.
Nobody ever said to put them into the operating budget from that perspective. I think that decision, at least from where I sit, was made internally. And I think, and I don't know by where, when, who, how, that could be longstanding order, but I do think if we look and say we've got an aging infrastructure, particularly when it comes to firehouses or something like that, and we should be looking at a renovation of a firehouse as one discrete project, and then go and do the next firehouse, and then go, because those are buildings just like our schools are buildings. I don't see how we can treat those any differently from my perspective. If it's truly as bad as I heard, Chief, are they as bad as what we're hearing in certain instances? I think I know the answer to this, but I'm just saying, this is the biggest softball you've gotten.
Yeah, thank you for that.
It's the pain meds, Chief. That's
Just
what it is. It's the pain
by way of to answer your question, yes. What we have done previously is met with the leadership from DPW and went through each of our buildings. We have quarterly meetings with DPW senior staff until the most recent change, identifying where those challenges are. What we have asked, and I've reiterated to Mr. Carey, is we can deal with old, we can't deal with broken and unreliable. And that has been our focus with his staff, with James Ryan, is to identify those things that are broken and unreliable, particularly the backbone of the building. The heating plant, the electrical, the plumbing, the drainage, and one of the problems they're most recently dealing with at Station 2 on
Sewer
Jennings
line,
Road
right?
is sewer lines, collapsed infrastructure underneath the building. We also have, as you know, some very old buildings. And if you recall, several years ago, and albeit at the height or the depth of the recession, we had asked for money for a study to identify exactly what you're talking about. How do we approach the renovation of each of the buildings, and maybe a replacement of a building in Southport, should that be the result of the study? So we have been working along this path to identify with DPW where those needs are. There has not, as Mr. Carey has pointed out, there has not been enough money in either the operating or the capital budget to accomplish what we need in 5 buildings that are very old.
So what's the next step? You guys are now inventorying those 5 buildings and coming up with what the specific needs of each of those buildings are? How are you guys playing this internally? And does anybody on our board believe I'm approaching this at the wrong angle here? Okay.
So, honestly, because it's a rolling issue, I've asked the building maintenance supervisor to basically come up with
Is that
project
Mr.
lists.
Ryan?
Mr. Ryan, to come up with project lists, which he's in the process of developing. I want to have that information available to me when I'm putting together the operating budget, and we're going to see what can go into this process, because obviously this is rolling, and what can be encumbered into the operating budget.
Can we,
And I'm doing that as quickly as I possibly can.
right, I would encourage you to actually view this much like we do the school ones and look at, see, we had a similar issue, right, from where, it was just when I got started here. This was McKinley School, right? They tried keeping it in the operating budget for years and years and years. Nothing ever happened. The school turned to mold and had to be torn down and ended up as a capital plan anyway. This seems very similar, not that we have mold issues, I don't know that we do. I'm just saying it seems as though we're allowing these buildings to get dilapidated when really what we need to do, let us worry about how we fund them, right? Come up with what the need is for the specific building. Come back to the town bodies, and that's what we're here for, is how best to fund them. So, you prioritize them and say, this firehouse is first, this firehouse is second, this is third, this is what the cost is. Really let us worry about how we break up that funding of them. Does anybody disagree with that?
No, but can I follow up?
Absolutely.
So, in the capital side, in 2022, 2023, there's a Fire Station 4 replacement. So clearly, replacing Station 4 in its entirety is on your radar.
Yep.
So you guys have some data to back this up.
If I may. Yes, we have identified Station 4 as, there are a couple of options, and the first selectman and I think that I presented to in our discussion about the study money, there are several options that are available to us. First is to renovate the existing facility, which the town does not own. There was a previous plan.
Oh.
That is owned by Southport Volunteer Fire Department.
Oh, that's the volunteer house.
Correct.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
That we
okay, I didn't know that.
occupy, and we need a station on that side of town. So we have struggled with it wasn't an issue that was going to move forward during the depths of the recession. We did add it to the capital forecast. This number is a placeholder. There are 2 options. This is a $3 million replacement. I continue to pursue a joint facility with the town of Westport. They are in the process of evaluating all of their stations, and the most urgent need for them is the one in the Greens Farms neighborhood. And the most urgent replacement need that we have is in Southport. It would make sense for the towns of Fairfield and the town of Westport to join together to fund a joint station that we, similar to the ECC project with the town of Westport, and in fact, I think the ECC success, which it will be, will give us a jump start into further negotiations with Westport in that regard. If that does not work, and Westport has not been as anxious as I have been, if that does not work, this $3 million will more than cover the renovations necessary at the existing Southport station.
And by the way, let me be clear on my comments. I'm not saying we've got a blank check to get all these stations done. I'm saying we've got to identify what the issues are, package them appropriately, and then make the decisions. So, but we need to have the discussion.
Right. On your Westport scenario, right? That's a paid department in Westport.
Correct.
A volunteer in Fairfield.
So
would we be sharing apparatus? Obviously, we have to share apparatus. Or are we going to have a separate Westport bay and a?
So everything would be on the table. Certainly, there is. It's been done in other communities where one in Revere and Malden. One apparatus goes out and turns left out of the station, and that would be towards Westport. Another apparatus turns right out of the station. There are labor issues that we'd have to concern ourselves with, and work through all of those issues. So I can't say to you now that there would be an easy path for a single joint station with completely shared resources. However, if we are renovating or building a new station and they are renovating or building a brand new station and we're buying apparatus and putting personnel in it and maintaining it forever and ever as a community resource, it would make more sense to do that jointly where they're so close together right now.
Got it.
Mrs. Lefkowitz, I'll go to Mr. Walsh.
Hi, do you know what their hesitation is, other than some of the challenges, labor, et cetera?
Labor and
That.
et cetera. I think that it's a cultural change. It is the whole issue of regionalization is a challenge to communities. It's an issue of identity or loss of identity. And it is a very difficult decision to say we're no longer an independent, completely in charge of our public safety assets. And that's where I think that the ECC project will give us a boost towards exploring a whole host of options. One of the areas that I would like to pursue with Westport on this station is, if we're building a new station, let's combine both of our maintenance divisions, our mechanics bays. We're operating out of Station 2. Another issue on our list of priorities, they are operating a maintenance bay out of the Westport Fire Headquarters on the Post Road. We could do a lot more with 3 people in a dedicated, defined maintenance facility that could fit on a piece of property with a fire station than we both can do separately.
All set? I'm going to go to Mr. Walsh.
Sorry, Brian. No
Good evening, Chief. In regards to Fire Station 4 replacement, that's not listed as a new project because you've had that on here before.
Correct.
And is that number stated $3 million?
Yeah, it is a placeholder. There are so many variables that could affect the outcome of that. We know that renovation of Station 4 will cost us, because we have already worked on some options for that, it would be far less than $3 million.
It'd be far less than
Far
$3
less
million.
than $3 million.
Oh,
The
okay.
$3 million number is right now a worst-case scenario in a brand-new facility, provided that is a joint facility. And I don't see, quite honestly, and we have evaluated, do we move Southport to the Post Road and build a brand-new station and vacate our current relationship with Southport Volunteers?
And take up
It doesn't
commercial
make
space
sense.
on the Post
It doesn't
Road?
make sense for a very short improvement in response time. Well, we're improving response time to some parts of the community. We're degrading response times to others, to another. So moving the station to another Fairfield location does not make sense right now.
The Post Road doesn't make sense because of
No.
the commercial aspects. Yeah.
Okay. I have no further questions for the Chief. If
Yeah,
I
can we go
have
back?
questions to-
Anybody on the chief, or can we go back to DPW? It just was something that came up.
If I can.
Yeah, please, Mr. Becker.
So the broader, at this point, just on the broader 5 stations, I mean, the directive is that they're going to go out and work with DPW and come back to maybe the boards, but certainly this board at some time in the near future overall. Because I think, just want to be clear there, because I think that talking about some of the maintenance budgets and some of those items, and then also looking at sort of that bigger list, one of the issues is some of these things like factoring in ages of boilers or other equipment, making sure we're not throwing operating money when it should be in a project.
Well, I think what the key here, David, is, at least, and I'm going to speak for myself, right? The firehouses are akin to our schools. The schools, we've put together plans to renovate all the schools. I don't think since we've been on the board, since I've been on the board, Mary, that there's ever been a discussion of a renovation of a full-scale renovation of a firehouse, right?
Yeah.
And what they've been trying to do is limp along and beg, borrow, and steal from the
Fully aware.
operating budget, where I'm saying it's probably about time that at least we lay all the cards on the table and figure out at each of these stations, what are the pain points, what needs to be done. And we present those as a full-scale renovation of each of those firehouses in whatever order makes sense. And again, we're not saying it's a blank check to get it done, but how old are these firehouses, truly?
So the oldest one was built in 1954, separate from Southport. The oldest
what's
one
the
is
youngest
Reef
one?
Road, 1973 on Jennings Road.
Right, so 50 years.
And the newest one on Jennings Road is probably in the worst condition. Just based on the construction style that was used compared to the rock-solid Station 1 on Reef Road. It's old, it's antiquated, however, it's held up very, very well.
Right.
If I'm...
No,
no?
I didn't mean to cut you off.
The only additional on that is tying some sort of a maintenance, I mean, I get
That's
the
very fair.
Westboard and all that, but tying that to it as well, because I think you're bursting at the seams there, and you're dealing with, again,
Well, what you're asking for is a
50-year-old
facilities,
building.
you're asking for basically
Yeah.
what the Board of Ed does. We build them a school, and they turn around, and it used to be Mr. Cullen,
Yeah.
puts together all the maintenance plans and all that, which we always complain about, right? But
Yeah.
we put together those plans to upkeep the facility after they're renovated, right?
Yeah, and I think, the Westport, Southport,
That's a
and
different-
Fairfield scenario, at some point, it's got to get put to bed, because it does tie into this.
Yeah.
I mean, one way or another, and I think there's some great things from a regionalization perspective, but we've talked about it for years now, and it's going to start to, you're going to find yourself waiting at some point, and things are going to fail, and then you're going to, again, throw good money at
That's
back,
very
and
fair.
in all the stations, but particularly
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, you're very fair. Yeah. Mr. DeWitt?
Yeah, I just want to support what the chairman's saying. We've asked you for a plan for the apparatus, but we haven't asked you for a plan for where the apparatus live, which seems counterintuitive, right? So, I think that's a great idea. We've been doing this with the school for as long as I've been on the board. I'm sure much longer. And again, this is my 12th year, and I don't ever remember hearing anything other than Station 4 being replaced in maintenance. So
I did in my first year here, and again, it was during the depth of the recession, asked for $120,000 or so for a station study, and it
we
was
never listen to
determined.
new people in their first year.
It was, I was too much
Plus,
too
we
soon.
saw the
Not
castle
you,
you built in
not
Norwalk.
not
so
you,
we
Mr.
were,
Superintendent.
I would like to say, we have a maintenance budget that the fire department maintains, and we have a division of labor with DPW that they do the major renovations, the major overhauls, bathroom replacements, the bones of the building, some of the HVAC and all of that. We have maintained out of our budget, those systems once they're installed, overhead doors and things like that, some minor electrical and plumbing. We have renovated, and I have to give credit to the line staff. They've renovated the kitchen and the day room with sweat equity at the Greenfield Health Station on Congress Street, and are currently finishing kitchen overhaul, complete gut and overhaul of the kitchen on Jennings Road. And this is sweat equity by our members while on duty.
So I think what we need to do on this, first of all, thank you for that, but I think that, and this goes a bit to Mr. Becker's point, when you come up with this plan for this has to be what happens at each of the firehouses, and here's how it plays out, you should equally come up with a plan as to how are these going to be maintained, right? Whose throat is it to choke when this stuff breaks, right? Because you're saying, hey, we beg, borrow, and steal, that's fine, but that doesn't give me comfort that I know who's ultimately responsible. Right? I know it's ultimately you for the firehouse, but it's who's ultimately responsible. What throat do we choke?
And I have to say, you know, the quarterly meetings with DPW staff have been very helpful to make sure there are no surprises, that we know what they're doing, they know what we're doing.
Well, here's the
And we'll
thing.
continue
There's no surprises between you guys, and I respect that. But there are surprises when it comes to us because a lot of the stuff never reaches us. So we wouldn't have known if it wasn't for an outside conversation about the sewer line collapsing or stuff like that. There's something noble to the fact that you're not asking for additional money for it, but it is an asset that we need to maintain. And so I'd much rather have the conversation. So I thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else for the chief? Are we good? Thank you. Let's go back to DPW. And I want to apologize. We're going to get to the Board of Ed. I know you guys are sitting here, so I don't want to disrespect that as well. So thank you for your patience. Go ahead to DPW.
So,
Can I just follow up on the asset management thing?
Yes, please.
Got off of that. Thank you. I'm sorry, just to get a little bit more clarification on the asset management. So this was on the waterfall before, last year? Is that correct?
correct.
Okay, so, and I think Mr. Bowman might have talked about something with like replacement of light bulbs and lighting and that kind of stuff. Am I remembering that conversation possibly
It's a whole
correctly?
extensive plan to basically do a facility audit and go out for RFQ and actually look for a company to come in and really take over a lot of our management and infrastructure of HVAC and lighting and things like that. I know Bob has been working with Ed Bowman on that directly, and the idea was to go out and basically hire a vendor to come in and replace everything, and based on the savings from the energy, it would actually pay for itself. There's a couple companies that do that, Honeywell, Johnson Controls, they'll actually come in and do a whole facilities audit and replace a lot of the infrastructure, boilers and things like that, and then it will pay for itself over the course of the contract.
All right, so that's what you're talking about when
Yep.
you're talking about this
Yes.
building improvement?
So you'll see an RFQ that's actually being worked on right now by Ed Bowman that will be published shortly, and we'll hopefully have numbers, hardened numbers on that.
And then when you talked earlier before about things that are coming up that you really probably shouldn't be having in the operating budget, but you were looking to make a capital expenditure, is that in this line too?
No.
Okay, that's something that you want to do?
That's correct.
Okay, but it's
Yep.
not on this
So-
particular sheet.
So again, we have about 67 buildings that we maintain.
I'm
So-
asking because I asked about this last year, so I'm
So
really
when-
glad you're doing this.
So when the library's calling us up, we thought we had a CDBG grant for $12,000 to do the library at Fairfield Woods. The project's like $22,000 or $23,000 to kind of gut the building. I mean, it's kind of at the point where it's like, it's not a lot of money, but if you have 10 or 15 of those projects in any given year, is it something that we bundle and put into the capital plan, or because honestly, looking at the bathroom at Fairfield Woods, it's been there for 35 years, or is that something that I kind of try to put into the operating budget? I mean, it's just a discussion to be had, but
No,
I'm
I think
trying
it's
to
a
get
really worthwhile discussion. I'm
trying
glad
to
you're
get my
raising it.
hands around that with sitting down with Jim, because he obviously is the one who gets all these requests, and we try to handle as much of it as we can in-house. But some of these projects can take 2 to 3 weeks, and then during the winter, we end up having to service a lot of the recreational buildings, Jackie Drell and things like that has a project coming up. So even though we try to get a lot of it done in the winter, you know, 3 or 4 week timeframes for some of these projects, you know, it goes by quick. So we don't like to open up too many projects, because then we're running around, we can't finish anything. So again, I'm working on trying to put together a plan so that I'll have that and starting to put together the operating budget.
No, I think that's great. And then something, for example, the portables behind the senior center where the nursing unit is, which are not in the greatest of condition. Where does that fall in your plan and looking at that?
So again,
Would you roll
Jim
it
is-
into that? Like,
yeah, I mean,
that
that's-
would be part of what
that's
you're working
just-
on?
I mean, if they're to the point where there's not much work you can do to a portable. Sometimes you just get to a point where you just condemn them and buy new ones, because they're not a huge capital cost. And, you know, if it's something that, you know, they're past their life, you know, that we can just go get quotes on and bring it, you know, to the board or whatever. But again, he's putting together, I have some of it already, and we're meeting to kind of flesh that out a little bit further.
Thank you.
Sure. Let's go on. Go ahead, let's go project by project like we did last time, just so that we know. Go ahead, Chris.
Just an overall DPW. So maybe this is for Mr. Mayor. Strategic Planning Committee, right? In DPW's non-recurring next year is the senior center design, followed by the year after senior center renovation. That's been on the waterfall. Last year it was in those years. Year before it was a year outright. Has the Strategic Planning Committee had any inputs into this and said things to DPW like next year, not next year, March we'll be talking about 2020's budget, right? That we need $100,000 to do the
2021's
senior
it.
center? 2021, what am I talking about? That's right. So have they had any input into this waterfall? Because it seems like there's a lot of things that might fall out of that strategic plan that would affect this, at least our non-recurring and recurring capital stuff.
I don't think the strategic planning committee has got to that facility or construction. I mean, Tom and I sat with them for a few hours a couple of weeks ago, and then it's not one of their focuses at this point.
They're not at this level of detail yet.
Yeah.
So
So they're not at the level of we need a new senior center or not, that kind of, I mean, that's a
No.
big deal, right?
Yeah.
They might be at that level, but it's not about prioritization of these plans. You know, do you do the bridge? Do you do this? They're not at that level yet.
Yeah.
And I would follow up on what Mr. DeWitt just said and ask if the Sustainable Task Force, I know Ed Bowman has obviously weighed in significantly, but has the Sustainable Task Force weighed in, or any of that
So
group?
this is something I did inherit in talking with James Ryan. They already have a lot of projects that need to be done there that are like the bathroom fixtures and everything are from the school. So they could be ripped out, but the building has never really had a full-scale abatement. So a lot of the work that needs to be done would actually be hazardous building material type of removal before we can go in and do wide-scale renovations to the site. In looking at that $100,000, the idea was just to kind of come in there and lay out some architectural plans and put together a couple alternatives for things that they want. But right now there's probably 7 or 8 projects that could be done, relatively easy that are needed. Bathrooms, things like I said, bathrooms, and I mean if you go through there, you could tell it still was an old school, and there hasn't been a ton of upgrades to the facility since back when the school closed.
Well, again, this is one of those where it's not really owned by, I mean, it's run by DPW, right?
That's right.
The maintenance side of it. It's not run by the people that are actually running
No,
the senior
that's right.
center. And that's part of the issue here, right? Yeah. Smarmy.
So I understand that you're going to try to better capture the projects that need to be done for the coming operating budget. But have we not, I mean, have we been missing all of this in past operating budgets? are they in there? Are we accounting for them? Or I'm just concerned about how we've been kind of managing those projects and the budget and what we actually need to service these very, you know,
So
that's what I'm
basically-
trying, I know you're putting together a list now, working with the fire chief, et cetera, but that didn't exist before? We didn't have a true picture of what we needed?
I mean, basically, what we really need to do is, obviously, planning is key to the process to kind of nail down, you know, first of all, what is it that we need? You know, we go in there and triage things and replace fixtures, and, you know, we don't go in there and rip apart the entire senior center and rebuild it anew. I mean, we just don't have the staffing level for that. What we really need to do is kind of get these projects on paper, which is what we're doing, go out for an RFQ for architectural services, and then basically task them with coming up with, you know, what is it, have a facility needs assessment, talk to the staff of the building, and then develop a project based on, you know, the fire department would be a perfect example. The chief said it perfectly. He said that we need $125,000 to kind of go through the buildings and then start putting together a facility maintenance plan and coming up with costs with that. The idea of going out for an RFQ to kind of shortlist architectural firms that we can get proposals for, to kind of go through and look at these individual projects is something that we are in the process of doing. You know, you shortlist four architects, it's professional services, you come in, you ask for, you know, a proposal based on the tasks that we would give them, and then we'd get four proposals from our short list of architects, and then we could, you know, move forward with that. You know, if those costs are above 100,000, obviously I would have to be coming in here, but if it's something below that, you know, there might be opportunities, if they're smaller, to kind of cover that in a fees and professional
So Brian,
services.
what would happen then, right, is that every few months or whatever, they get together, they basically say, here's the needs list, so it's not like there's not a needs list. What can we afford to do based on what money's available from the operating plan? And what do we need to kick to the next year?
That's basically what happens now, but the problem with that is that I never can anticipate the next kind of
Right.
disaster, you know? And I would commit to doing projects that are, you know, longer term projects, but I don't know if tomorrow I'm gonna get a call and say, you know, the elevator at, you know, the library is not working any longer.
So Sheila, what that does to us is we never hear of those things. It stays within the department, they live with it, they put it on the list to the next year, and then they carry it forward to the next year. And then all of a sudden, we're out in town and we hear about, you know, the sewer line collapsed or a boiler collapsed, and it's like, well, wait a minute, how the heck did this happen, right? And it's like, well, the town bodies didn't want to spend the money, right, is what the refrain would be. Well, the town bodies didn't know that the money, that was a requirement right now, right? And I'm not trying to insulate us, I'm just saying, in the last few months as I've been going around, I've been surprised because this stuff's been surfacing, right?
There's never a shortage of projects in this town or any other town I've
Right.
either worked for or consulted for.
Right.
And I've never met a project that time and money can't fix.
Right.
So it's just a matter of
It
where you
depends
want
on
to
where
put
you
the
wanna-
resources.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Do you spend money on replacing or repairing to buy time, is essentially what happens.
Well, and that kind of goes to Mr. Becker's point, at some point, you got to get off the pot, right? The Firehouse 4 is an example where we eventually you're going to have to move on it one way or another, you know. Yeah. All right. Let's go project by project here. I do want to get to the Board of
Yes.
Education quickly. And again, we're not approving any projects here, so we don't need to get into the details of each individual project, but I think this has been good dialogue so far this
We're just going to
evening.
go over the new projects?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's go ahead, show us the new projects here, if you don't mind.
Are you starting with 2020 or 2021?
Let's start with 2022, 2021. Is there anything new on here?
Yep.
So 2020, 2021, you'll see that there's a line item for storm system improvements. Again, this goes back to the idea of facility type of maintenance.
Yeah.
After the September storm of 2019, we've been inundated with these kind of neighborhood flooding or drainage issues that vary anywhere, vary anywhere between $50,000 and $250,000, and there's systemic issues that need to be addressed. And we, after the storm on Sunday, again, keeps flooding in this area, and it's basically because things have been built or overbuilt in certain areas, and the infrastructure dates anywhere from the 40s, 50s, or 60s. So we're trying to send a lot more water in a shorter period, higher intensity down a system that's outdated. So the idea was to kind of take this and put it to addressing, I would say there's 50 projects, but maybe even just trying to address the top 10 and move forward with that. And me and Bill have sat down with Laura and, just kind of come up with those.
Brian, is that your internal project, so you guys will do in-house?
Yes.
Okay. So this is basically
So
supplies
again,
and-
we would look at it, and if it's something like replacing a head wall or something we can do internally,
Sure.
we would do that. If
Okay.
it's something, that's beyond what we're capable of, then we would, go out to
Contract it out.
bid and
Good.
contract it out.
Thank you.
So the next thing is just the DPW needs new radios. The radio system is about 20 years old. We still do use the radios, not as much as before, but we just have this new Viochi software that we've been using for storm response. The idea is to actually get GPS in all of the town trucks. There's a lot of reasons for doing that. First of all, it cuts down on the number of complaints, especially during plowing. People like to call and say, you haven't plowed my street. We'd be able to look it up and say, we were here at 9:30, 10:45, 11:15.
Yeah.
So it cuts down on that. The other thing is after, a large emergency event like at Sandy, there's a lot of paperwork that needs to be done to get reimbursement. Tons of it associated with response directly to trees. We would be able to run reports that would be critical to FEMA to say, this truck was on the scene from this time to this time.
For expense
For
reimbursement.
expense
okay.
reimbursement. I did have this in 2012 for Sandy and Stratford when I was putting back. I had it. I didn't have it in 2011 when I was doing Irene reimbursement. I had it during Sandy reimbursement. It was night and day how quickly I could pull the information I needed, and dealing with the FEMA staff coming out, they were, they said this is worth its weight in gold. So we got quotes from vendors. They were anywhere between $250,000 and $350,000, and it's just something that is, if we're going to upgrade the radios, the GPS thing is it's a no-brainer.
Okay. Any other questions on that? Seeing none, you don't have a lot of new stuff on here. You have some adjustments in price points, right?
Correct.
And thankfully, so the adjustments are, I guess it's reimbursements is what they are. It's not really adjustments. But you come down, I guess the next one that pops is the $24 million on the South Benson stormwater pump station lines. Say it again? Yeah, it's a huge one. And that's brand new. Can you tell us briefly about this one?
Next year. I'll let Bill talk about that one.
Oh, sure, pass the buck. We know how you operate.
Well, it's basically it's to combat the climate change, rising sea level, more intense storms that we've been having, and basically it was a two-pronged approach. Through the Department of Housing grant, the town had hired a consultant to study the South Benson, we'll call it the South Benson neighborhood, where we were going to do like a dike system and a pump station, and we would redirect the drainage all to one central location, say somewhere near Jennings Beach, and then that's where the pump station would be. So offhand, I'll say it was like $10 or $11 million for the drainage system, $10 or $11 million for the pump station, and then there's probably a $1 or $2 million contingency to get to the $24 million one. We didn't put it in last year because we, at the same time, we had the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer study the Fairfield Shore and potential resiliency projects. And unfortunately, the Army Corps of Engineers determined that the project was really cost prohibitive. Theirs was a little bit more extensive. It went from like Reef Road all the way to Riverside. And that rough estimate was like $60 or $100 million, and it was, they recommended that.
So for a layman's term, what is this, like a big sump pump?
Yes.
Yeah, it's basically, it collects the water in one location and will pump it out.
And when would this operate? Like, how many storms a year would this thing operate?
Well, it would really operate for the biggest storms, but when we have it all drained to what we call a drawdown or a low point, that water, say it's 10 feet below, or I think it's 15 or 19 feet actually, below sea level, it would kick on and the pump would run continuously for those minor storms where, like, say for even this past weekend, where it wasn't a significant, where you'd have to run the whole thing.
A ton
but
of
you would
rain
have-
at one time.
Right. So they might be a series of pumps where the ones are constantly running and operating, and then you bring out the big boys when there's a major event, 5 or 7 inches over a 24-hour period or something like that. So,
Yeah, Mr. Walsh?
Is this to pump it out into Long Island Sound?
yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else on this one? And we'll obviously get a full presentation on this when this comes, if this comes.
And there's no potential for grants at this point in time that you know about?
The Army Corps of Engineers was one that we were looking at. We were constantly looking at grants, and then that's sometimes, just to let everybody know, the capital planning chart sometimes fluctuates a little bit because there's a couple of bridge and even a couple of sidewalk projects that we're actually applying for 2 grants at the same time. One might be a 50% cost share, and the other one might be an 80 or 100% cost, a reimbursement, I'm sorry. And so one's obviously more competitive, so we want to at least try to get something in the hopper, but in the same token, we're constantly looking for grants. And to be honest with you, from the last 18 months and probably to the next 18 months, the department has gotten involved with about 30 or 35 grants that we're constantly looking for and trying to, whether it be a grant for the design or a study or for construction. Obviously, the construction ones are the most benefit, so.
Mr. Walsh?
In general, do you have no other projects on here, correct? We've talked about all your new projects, I think, at this point in time.
That's right.
So I just wanted to ask you a general question. We heard earlier that there's going to be kind of basically an inflationary amount that we put on there of about 2% for later years. Do you both find that 2% is a good number in your business? Because I'll tell you, when we get school projects, when we get the renovation or rebuild of the clubhouse at the golf course, we keep hearing that number for construction costs is 4% a year.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering why we're using 2% on projects, on
Okay.
construction projects, when we actually get the numbers and get real numbers by architects and engineers and stuff like that, on builds going out, it's more closer to 4%.
I agree with Mr. Walsh on this. That 2% is really just a COLA adjustment that you guys have put on here, but there,
I mean, unless
we've
somebody
seen
can tell
those
me,
escalate.
I
Yeah.
guess I'm asking both of you when you see stuff go out. I mean, because
Yeah.
you see this more than we see this. So you see this on these bridge projects, and you put a number on them, and you think it's going to be a certain amount. And the bridge, by the time design's done, and you wait for money to come in, we're 4 or 5 years out sometimes on these bridges, and then doesn't the numbers change?
I think I've been hearing about this Duck Farm Road Bridge for,
So just in the recent bids that have come back, it's been a tough bidding environment. Materials have been a little higher, but it's hard to say. I mean, I don't want to say it, if we do go into recession, things tend to go the other way. So we're at a point right now where bids have not been coming back as favorable, but to say in 2 or 3 years whether or not that 2% or 4% is going to stay true, I don't know. I mean, that's the hard thing. I didn't know that the steel pricing was going to go up, and that was based on not really market forces, other than we tried to put tariffs on, and everyone who's selling us steel now is saying, yeah, this is going to drive the cost of steel up. So, when we do talk to architects based on materials or designers, we do try to look at or try to ask for alternatives based on the bidding environment, what they're seeing that may be cheaper and do the same, provide the same benefit but at a reduced cost.
Yeah, I would agree. In 2012 to say 2014, the tougher labor market and materials weren't too bad. So, 1 or 2% was definitely reasonable. If you get into, like Brian was saying, material costs, or it's a tougher labor market, then and we get less bidders for a particular contract, then chances are the price, would go up. But it really does vary year to year, and it is a hard thing to, put an exact figure on it. The only thing I could say is with the inflation, or even when we come to contingencies, at the beginning of the project, we like to put a higher one because we really don't know. But that would be, say, for preliminary design. But when you get to semi-final, then you get a little bit more accurate. And then when you get to the final design, you get as accurate as you can be. And then when the bids go out, obviously, then that's our best, because we actually have,
I just know some of your projects are like prolonged. Like you plan for them well in advance, which you have to do, and you have to apply for grants and all. It's a long time frame on your project.
So paving is obviously really volatile because it's commodity-based, petroleum-based. This year we're actually receiving, rather than escalation, they're actually paying us back on certain projects for paving. I mean, it's not a lot of money, but we're not paying an escalation cost. But that escalation cost will actually change from month to month based on their, on their cost, whether or not they're passing it along to us or we're basically getting reimbursed.
Mr. DeWitt, you had a question, and then I want to move on.
Actually, Mr. Becker wanted to just say something
Go
before
ahead,
I
Mr.
did.
Becker.
Just on that with the escalator, I think by and large the projects seem to come to us with some additions, at alternates or things change along the way anyways. So being a little bit, more conservative with that by maybe putting in a 4% escalator one way or another seems like it's probably going to pay off for us, even if it dips.
Thank you, Mr. Becker.
Thank you,
We'll go
Mr.
back to Mr. DeWitt.
Yeah, so just on process, right? So I'm with you on steel, but so the Rooster River, Ash Creek flood control, we're going to need steel.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, it hasn't been designed yet. So
Okay.
in my mind as the conservation director also, no, I would not like to see that sheet piled down the middle of the river. That's what's kind of got us in this position.
Okay, fair.
That's your day job. Now go
But
ahead.
but I guess my question is on process. 2017, our capital meeting said Rooster River is going to cost us 1.25. Then in 2018 we said it's going to cost us 1.25, and this year we're saying it's going to cost 1.25. So we haven't done anything with that number in 3 to 4 years. So do those numbers just stay stagnant in there? I mean, I'm with you. Steel changes, labor changes, but none of these numbers change. Is there so much contingency built into them that they don't need to change? I don't think so.
Well, for the Rooster River one, it's like it's really two different type projects. One was actually even three. The Rooster River project depended on state bonding and funding, and then that represent like the town share. At one point, we were looking at
Okay.
combining 2 bridges into one, and that's where one of those figures came in. That one from the State Bonding Commission has kind of went to sleep, it's gone to sleep, so to speak. They have not pushed it any further, and it's really no longer viable right now. We can always ask for it back, but right now, it's kind of stagnant. However,
you're-
at the same
The Rooster River money we thought we were going to get isn't happening.
That's correct. We got a small amount to do a study and update the study, which is important, so that gives us, if a grant were to pop up, say now, that we have an updated study. The original study was from 2003. We now have one from 2017, 2018. So that's an important factor for
So
going
you got
forward.
better data, but the data hasn't changed in 3 years. It still says 1.25. I mean,
right.
I would expect, so I'm with you, if it was a capped grant with the state and 1.25, you answered my question. Now
Okay,
you said
then.
we had a cap, now the money went away. If we still want to do Rooster River, which I'm sure we do, then that number should be 4 or 5.
Well, one of the things why I've kept it on the chart is, as you might recall, we had, Brian mentioned it before, last September, the Rooster River overflowed its banks, caused a lot of flooding.
Yep.
Since then, we have hired an engineer to do what we call a detention study. One of the things when we're talking about the stormwater improvements we have to be careful of is some of the people who experience flooding just want the water to disappear. Well, if you're in the mid-watershed, making that water disappear means bombing out someone downstream. So we don't want to do that. So one of the things where we've taken a more detailed look at and had our consultant look at 7 locations of the Rooster River for what we would call detention areas or holding ponds. And so we have at least preliminary locations set up, and now we're going to go into the next phase once we get the revised design costs, and then we're going to pick, and there's up to 7 locations. We're kind of throw out 2 of them, so there's going to be 5, and so we'll probably do 1 or 2 locations a year, spread them out, where maybe we do one easy to construct one, and then maybe one difficult one as well. And so that money, we were planning on using that money as potential for these detention ponds. So even though the state money has gone away, we were planning on using that.
Do you still think 1.25 is a good number?
It's a good number for 1 or 2 of the projects that we have, yeah.
Okay?
Anybody? Yeah, Mrs. Esmond.
See, that's what I'm afraid of.
Maybe more projects.
Oh, maybe more projects, oh, okay. Then I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ms. Esmond.
Thank you, and good evening, gentlemen. So, well, let me just say, as somebody who lost my vehicle and a lot of personal possessions, I'm keenly interested in us focusing on the Rooster River. But my question is, we seem to have 2 drivers. So one is inflation, that would be labor and materials. And the other is, vast changes to the scope of a project. I'm kind of thinking of WPCA. Where can that be anticipated in a timeline, that we're not just looking at increasing the cost that we already have factored into it, but some expansion of the scope of the project?
Usually, I would say somewhere in the middle of the design towards the end. The key component for a lot of these projects is doing the testing. And to test for a water table, test for soil conditions, whether it's rock, even for a project, if you have a 20-foot excavation and the excavation's going to collapse, now all of a sudden you got to do sheathing or shoring up, and so that's going to increase the cost. We don't know that when we first design or go for a grant, but as the project gets developed, and as I was saying before, the pattern that we've had the last couple of, I'll say the last year or two certainly, is you get a preliminary, or there's a grant estimate, then a preliminary estimate, then semifinal, and then final. And then if there's a slight adjustment, hopefully it's only a slight adjustment for when the bids, are opened. So somewhere between, probably around the semifinal, which is about 70% design, is where we get all the soil information and testing. And then that's where we can better, the engineer or the town, but usually the engineer, that would give us a more accurate cost estimate.
And at that time, we would make an adjustment to these numbers?
Yes.
Okay. I do, Mr. Chairman, have a question about the non-recurring 1920 section, if I can. So as a 12-year resident of literally the Four Corners where the Stratfield project is taking place, I can speak on behalf of Stratfield Village. We're thrilled to see this happening. My question is, since it's on such an immediate timeline, is the project, does the project depend on the completion of the private funding that's being raised by Stratfield Village Association? I mean, we're grateful to all the contributors, Sacred Heart, Sunrise, but I don't know if they've met their goal, and so does that somehow impact the timeline of the project?
No, actually, we have a $650,000 grant, for urban aid grant from the state of Connecticut, and there's a town share of $100,000 that we're committed to. So that project we can do within, what would say, the town right-of-way or the state right-of-way, and we can get that project done. The other $100,000 is mainly for areas where they were thinking of extending it a little bit beyond, maybe into private property. If you do like a brick walk, you know, you have the sidewalk, but then you do a brick walk, say, to the store's frontage. That would be something that would be private, and that's where their money is going to be used for. Same thing with landscaping. We can, as part of the grant, we can do some landscaping or street trees. That would be part of ours. But if they want to do flower boxes or, you know, we'll call it a rain garden or some sort of a landscaping more on the private side or right on the line, so to speak, then that's where we could do it. But it's not dependent on it. But if they want to, in other words, we can control the scope. So if they fall short on that, well, they're going to get less on the private side. If they get more, they attain their goal, then they'll be able to do what they wanted to do on that section.
Sort of aftermarket aspects of the project.
Well, yeah, or they'd have to raise that money as we go out to bid. And then even then, what we've learned to do is we could do an ad alternate.
Yeah.
And so we can tear that off and just say, we're not doing that. We don't have the funding for it.
Got it.
I
Thank you.
If we do,
appreciate-
then we got it, so.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the discussion. I want to move this along.
Sure, of
Because we're
course,
getting
yep.
into individual
Detail, yep.
projects that we can't, and that's not meant to you, Ms. Esmond. It's just overall. It's at 9:10. Any other questions on this?
Yeah, I
Go
just
ahead.
wanted, thank you. I wanted to go back to the Rooster River, because I spoke to a lot of people who lived on the Bridgeport border. Does it make sense to perhaps look at some of the, where we could share costs with Bridgeport to focus on that part of the river first?
So the Rooster River is an exceedingly complicated issue, and you know it had a flood control project back that was completed in the 1960s. It's just that the area is so highly urbanized, and as you know, flooding has increased because of intensity of rain. There's not anywhere for the water to go because the houses are so built up on the river.
Well, and Brian, I mean, Mr. Tetra and I don't want to speak for him, but Mr. Tetra and I and some others spent an afternoon this spring trying to help clean it up. And what was evident is a lot of the, without getting into details, a lot of the neighborhood has actually piled stuff up across the river that has actually caused some of the issues with the clogging of the river. So there's complaints about the clogging of the river, but there's also all sorts of debris that's thrown right on the banks of the river that when the rain comes, washes the debris right into the river and then clogs everything
That helped
up.
clog it up. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Yeah,
it's-
they're planning on doing a cleanup this spring for future reference.
Yeah, there
But
was
I
like
do wanna
5 of
answer
us that showed up. It's
Yeah.
going to take like 2,000 years, but it'll be
Yeah.
clean.
I do want to answer the question, though, is we have basically monthly calls with the town of Trumbull and because a lot of the rain from, that came from the Trumbull Mall actually contributed, and the city of Bridgeport. Back in late fall, or was it even early spring? I can't remember. I think it was late fall, where we worked with Mountain Grove Cemetery and the city of Bridgeport and did a 3-way cost share to remove all the debris that had, so if it rained again immediately after, we wouldn't be in trouble. And so we were able to clear a lot of the waterway and passageway, which certainly has helped. And we're using that as a model for one of those detention areas we were talking about. We're looking at is what's the name of the golf course?
Fairchild Wheeler.
Fairchild Wheeler,
The-
yeah.
the other-
You share with Bridgeport, so.
The other thing is, Trumbull's actually looking at rezoning the Trumbull Mall, and if they do that, and there's any further development there, there's going to be a big opportunity to try to
Yeah.
correct that. But again,
With the apartments, right?
the fixes to the Rooster River are going to be kind of offline rather than fixing the main channel.
Thank you. All right, I want to wrap this up and just go.
Mr. Mayor, a question in regards to the 2%.
Go ahead on the 2%.
Mr. Mayor, on the 2% that Mrs. Sachs just spoke about, where is that applied here on any of the numbers? Because all the numbers are rounded. I heard the chief say the $3 million for his station is still the $3 million. I've heard the $1,125,000 is still the $1,125,000. Which of these projects is the 2% been applied to for the future years?
Well, I can't answer that question specific, but I'll talk a little bit about inflationary factors. Basically, you have three issues. You have labor, materials, you have resource availability. If you look at the labor aspect, you know, 2% for labor is a reasonable number based upon history and all kinds of economic forecasts, okay? When it comes to materials, that has to do with the economy, all right? Like tomorrow, the Fed's going to meet again. Everybody expects them to lower interest rates. You know, 10-year bonds now are at 1 point whatever percent. So, and then you got the troubles going on in China. So there does not, right now in the marketplace, there's not, in the economic data, nobody's projecting big increases in commodities. That's been upset a little bit by the tariff issues and all that kind of stuff.
Bob,
But
we've
with
already-
respect to the
Bob,
direct,
we've already covered this. Everything you're saying is absolutely true.
right, so I'm
I
just,
think the question is, where's the 2%?
well, the 2%, so what I'm just trying to explain that part, okay. But the 2%, when we talked, when the directive goes out to the department heads, we say, you know, look, these numbers are round numbers. When I say they're round numbers, of course they're round numbers. Some of these numbers are 5 years out.
Got it.
So say, when you make your best estimates, when you talk to your vendors, make sure there is an inflation factor in there, and make sure that inflation factor is a minimum of 2%,
Who
so it's
puts it in?
incorporated. The department heads.
So you guys don't put it in?
We don't put it in.
So they put it in. So
Put it
to
in.
Mr. DeWitt's point, we've had a number that's been in there for like 5 years. It's the same number. Where's the 2%?
But as the gentleman who's responsible for that number has indicated that based upon his information today, the projects that he wants to do that's in here, that number covers it.
So there's not, so there has been no 2% in that number.
Maybe not in that number,
On
but
that particular project, no.
Right, so the question becomes to Mr. Walsh, which he asked, like, just got, where's the 2%? Like, where's it applied? Right, so, and we don't have to answer that tonight, right, because we don't have the answer.
It's not on that project that you
but
talked
the
about.
question
It's
is,
not on the Chiefs project.
but as I understand Mr. Hurley's comments, the number that's there now that he wants to, the work that he wants to do in 2021, 2022 would be covered by, including inflation factors expected,
Bob.
1.25 million. Is
Bob,
that a
we
correct statement?
Bob, yeah, we understand that, but I guess the question is, what was represented earlier tonight was that there was an inflationary factor of 2% that was applied. Now we have all sorts of exceptions where the 2% was applied, so the question, it's a very simple question. Where was it applied and where wasn't it applied? And we don't have to answer it tonight, because I don't expect you to know it. Like-
Right, the only point I'm trying to make is that if you look at the number, and I'm thinking that this is what Mr. Hurley did, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. He looked at the number, he said, here's what I'm going to do it, here's what I think it's going to cost, and here's what I think it's going to cost 3 years from now with inflation.
Great.
So
You think that's what happened, and I get it, and I understand it. What I'm saying is we want to know that's what happened, right? We want to know that there's either an inflationary factor or there's a reason under each project why there's not an inflationary factor. That's all we're saying. And I'm not, by the way, my apologies for cutting you off. Your example of why the 2% was right or wrong, we had that, I get it. What we're trying to get to is where was it applied or not, because we're getting burned here year after year after year, where that inflationary factor, oh, we thought it was going to cover it, but inflation was this. We keep getting burned once we get the right numbers.
Yeah, and these numbers are never going to be exact, but the third factor I didn't get to, it's resource availability.
I get, Bob, you
you go out
made the
and
sale. You
yeah.
made the sale. Yeah. I mean, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, right, exactly.
And then, and the way I do it, I can't speak for other people, but if I have a figure of, say, 590,000, I might put 600,000 here, so there's already a little factor of roundup for the inflation.
And that's
But
the
you don't
exact
know
way-
that.
That's the
so
exact way
I
to do it,
understand that.
and it's just like, did we up it by 2%, or did we just use it? If we just used what we used in the
What we
prior
can do, we
year,
can look through and see and make sure, and to Mr. DeWitt's point there, if there's one that's been stagnant and we know the scope hasn't changed, then we probably should come and incorporate that.
Exactly.
The ones that were rounded up and were covered, like the other one, then we're fines. But you don't know that, so I understand.
Correct.
I got it. Yep.
Mr. Hurley, on these bridges, I just want to know in general, if you know they're 4 years out when you first put them on this thing,
That's why we have this meeting.
do you, when you do your quote to put it on here, tell the contractor, the architect, whoever you need to go to and say, I need 4 years at 2% on here as well? Like, is there a contingency for that? Or do you just use a number at the time that you first do the construction stuff?
Depends on the complexity of the project. So
Okay.
Perry's Green is on there.
Yeah.
That's just sheet piling and quick design. It's not like,
Okay.
there's not a
Okay.
lot of mystery to that.
Okay.
So yeah, we can easily apply, an escalator to that cost. But, when things are being designed,
Yeah.
each trunk sewer line, just things become complicated when you start opening the ground,
Sure.
So, there's been a number that was applied to that project that was part of the grant that was submitted to the DECD. And for whatever reason, everyone held on to that number, and through the process, that number was part of an estimate very early on the process.
Mr.
You
Kay,
go to
that's
design.
You're absolutely right, and that's part of the point is, when we look at these numbers every year, we want to make sure they've been refreshed for the best available information, as opposed to, hey, it's the number, we'll just carry it forward, right? To Mr. Hurley's point, or something like that, So it's not, yeah.
Thanks.
Just so we're all on the same page.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Mayor, thank you, and my apologies for cutting you off like I did. All right, so anybody else on DPW projects? Any other projects on this sheet that we want to touch on? There's a new engine.
Fire trucks.
Yeah, very briefly. Is there anything from the police on here, Chief? All right, why don't you come on up for that, and if you don't mind, and we'll talk about those two items, and then I do want to get
Thank
to the
you.
Board of Ed and to the projects, and again, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, Mr. Hurley, Mr. Carey, thank you for being here, thanks for that. Go ahead, why don't we go through the, why don't we go quickly through the trucks and through this? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Did you want an overview of the project?
Yeah, why don't you give it to us?
Okay. We've been on the waterfall for a number of years now. We believe this is a viable project for 2020. We do intend to bring it before the boards. We've made great progress in the last couple months. New to this table is Officer Jason Greenfield, a relatively newer officer on our department, but our resident expert on radio projects, and he's really poured his heart and soul into this project and is available for any technical questions. So just a quick overview.
So his first introduction to us is to ask for $5.8 million. Way to go, Chief.
Exactly, a great beginning.
Boy, the firehouse seems like a bargain right about Go right ahead.
So we have a legacy system in place that is constructed in 1998, 1999. Parts are no longer available for our radio system. We've already experienced 2 brief failures this year alone. And it's a challenge in that we know it's not going to continue functionality for much longer. Coupled with that, the state, with some federal money, has built out a very robust state system throughout our region and the state. And after looking at a number of possibilities, we realized that piggybacking off of that infrastructure and taking advantage of the already built infrastructure offers us a real good opportunity here. We're not alone. Most of the towns in our region are also in various stages of either contemplation or moving forward with this exact same strategy. I'll let Jason explain some of the intricate values to going this route. But basically, anything that we would build in our system, other towns could take advantage of. And to that point, any towns that surround us who built out infrastructure would directly aid us also, so that there's some great advantages to this. Chief, did you want to add anything?
The fire department is in a similar situation. Our legacy system is not quite as old as the police department, but we're taking the opportunity to build one system that serves both departments as well as some others. This does build on a grant-funded UASC, which is a federal grant program system that we built several years ago. If you recall, in 2001, after 9/11, the #1 recommendation of the 9/11 Commission was interoperability between municipal departments and between municipalities. We're finally at a point where both the police department and fire department, as well as our neighbors, are ready to act on that. All of our systems have degraded to the point where we have to act, but we're mindful of that recommendation for interoperability, and we will have seamless communications not only with the police department, but with the neighboring fire departments that we rely heavily for in mutual aid.
Good evening. It's a great way to meet, asking for the dollar amount that we are. So a couple other points I'd like to add, and I appreciate my chief and Chief McCarthy giving me this opportunity to speak to you, is that we are planning and looking at a global system for the town of Fairfield that primarily will be to serve the public safety departments, but will also tie in other town departments, provide growth opportunity without additional infrastructure for any other town user groups that may need to become a part of it, as well as provide a solution for the Board of Ed that gives them coverage within their school buildings to enhance their security and our interoperability with them. We've seen in a couple of major weather events recently that we have had our hands tied by the cellular networks not being efficient or not providing any coverage to us at all. We've learned that in those instances, the reliable communications are so effective and key for us to be able to perform our duties, and we find that the state's radio network is extremely reliable and has proven to be reliable because of the redundancy that they have built into it. Buying into that system, as opposed to looking at potentially any other alternative, I think is going to provide us with the longest lasting solution and the best investment for the town overall. The easiest way to kind of get into the details, and I think that at a later meeting we'll probably provide far more detail, would be to answer any questions that you may have about the general concept and overview at this point.
Thank you, sir. I do want to keep this at a high level because we could go on for this and eventually will go on for this in a long period of time. So is there any questions, Mr. DeWitt?
So our DPW director, interim director, said tonight he wants to buy new radio systems. Will that be, will your system work with his system?
Okay with this, or you want to?
Fall on the sword. Go for it. Yeah.
When I first took on this project several months ago, I did reach out to DPW. We've obviously had a change in leadership at DPW since then. I received some information that allowed me to include them in this high-level quote that we've created. We certainly have missed some communication there. I think I have an idea of what system that they have been quoted out or what they may be looking at, and it may serve them better to be a part of ours, as our infrastructure will be far more robust, I think, than what they're maybe.
Most assuredly during a storm event, right?
I'm sorry?
Most assuredly during a storm event, you guys all being on the same system seems to make a lot of sense.
To be very basic about the way that their current system operates, they have an antenna on the corner of their building that should reach for the most areas of town. If they were to operate within the state's network, there would be a blanket of coverage throughout the region and in this town that would cover them, and a lot of backup redundancy.
Yeah.
So now I have one more question, but now I have a follow-on question. So how do we make sure that your system gets in their trucks? Because I can hear us a year from now saying, "Oh yeah, we bought our system. You bought our systems. They don't talk." You know.
So they would.
Sounded like Eeyore.
Sorry. Sorry. Oh,
no
sorry.
matter.
Yeah, no. Oh bother. Right.
So the dollar amount that we've come up with for our system includes subscriber units or end user radios for DPW. They're just another channel on the system. It's not actual separate physical infrastructure. It is a part of the common infrastructure.
All right, that's
a
a good
matter
answer.
of just refining that with DPW leadership.
And then my last question. So the last 2 years, This has been a $4 million expense. This year it's 5.8, which kind of highlights this conversation we've been having tonight. Number stays, it stays, it stays. Oh, wait a minute, get ready to pull the trigger, it goes up 1.8 million. Why did this go up $1.8 million?
They hired the new guy.
Thanks, Jason, for that new number. Yeah. So the state vendor is Motorola and Norcom, and we finally got the coverage maps that we so desperately needed from them. Very robust maps down to the layer of penetration to key buildings, our school systems, things of that nature. And that kind of led us to where we're going to need towers to accomplish that coverage. A tower being at the $1 million mark per unit, give or take. So it was really recently, within the last couple weeks, I would say, that Motorola has really provided us the pricing scheme to give us the real numbers other than a placeholder. Did you want to add anything?
So we're seeing for probably the first time in a long time or ever that the state is so welcoming with their arms open to share their resources at the local level, which has really spearheaded a lot of the other communities, and I think at least three of our neighbors that are actively pursuing pricing to join this system as well. Prior to that, when we put a placeholder in for radio replacement, we were in a limbo state where we weren't really sure what the FCC was going to do with our currently assigned frequencies for the police department. We have not seen any change for that, and as of right now, we know there's a mandate to abandon those frequencies as they're reassigning frequencies. Right. So there was some hope that we may be able to stay in that frequency range, but we can't just sit around and hope anymore for that. And without any direction, this has become a very viable and sustainable option.
So 5.8 is a good number.
So we have a high-level quote for both components, Board of Ed and the Public Safety Town Solution. We're, if you want a confidence level on that, we're about 80%. There should be some minor fluctuation, but until we get the firm proposal, that's where we're at.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Left.
And it's a system that would allow us to grow as the technology grows and changes?
That's one of the benefits of joining the state system. They have paid significant upfront costs for the equipment that essentially runs the system. So as new features evolve, typically we see these large systems get access to it far ahead of individual isolated systems. So yes, absolutely. Or the expansion to other user groups. There's a lot of possibilities. Whereas if we were to invest in something different or isolated, that technology would come obsolete far faster.
And then if we were to consider shared with Westport, and would we be able to kind of network with them within this system?
So this system provides incredible interoperability. It's a matter of changing a channel on the radio as opposed to switching to an entirely different piece of equipment. One of the nice things as well is the state police runs a 24-hour network operations center. If we have any issues, you call them on the phone. If you have a large-scale incident and you need them to connect multiple communities that are a part of the system on one common group to communicate, they can do that at the snap of a finger.
Just to follow up on that question, are we looking at regionalization at all with the ECC, with Westport? Does this play in terms of our plans? I mean, is this kind of a part of a bigger plan, moving in that direction, or does it work well, or not with ECC?
So the ECC project is not contingent on the radio project, right, nor vice versa. But yes, we're working closely. So Westport is actually a little more desperate than we are. So we're talking to them about, well, if you put a tower here, we might be able to put a tower here. Our tower benefits your bad spot in town, and vice versa. So yeah, we're talking to them all the time about that. That also includes Bridgeport, which is a little bit different system, but everything that Bridgeport builds, especially on our town line, is going to benefit our coverage issues. And did you have anything?
Sure. As I mentioned, we built this system in the region through a federal grant, the OASI program. Those OASI radios, which work off of the same exact system, provide the basis for our mutual aid team. So regional hazmat team already operates on that. When we have mutual aid responses, we operate on that frequency. So it doesn't necessarily lead into regionalization, but certainly for mutual aid, we would use this system as the communication platform to reach those units coming in or when we go to their communities.
Ms. Esmond?
Thank you. Do you need to secure permission for placement of towers in any case on private property, or is it public property placement only?
All of our site locations that we're looking at right now are either existing locations that we have equipment. We are looking at a site at the Sacred Heart University and another one at an already operating cellular tower. So we're not putting a shovel in the ground anywhere or starting from scratch on any private property.
We're going to go to Mr. Walsh, and then I'm going to wrap this one up.
So, Chief McCarthy, I heard you talk about the system yourself. So are you going to have to buy any future equipment to tie into this system yourself, or you already have that equipment?
So we would purchase mobile subscriber units and portables. That is part of the package. So it's included in the number.
It's included.
That you have.
So
Yes,
it's
it
both
is.
police and fire.
Correct.
I was a little confused because it said police, but okay, great.
It's
Thank
a
you.
joint project.
Thank you. All right. So let's it's time to move on this one. Let's go forward. Anything else? We can go and start talking about fire trucks a little bit and understand that, and then we can move on. I want to be cognizant the Board of Ed's been sitting here patiently all night. So why don't we go to the engines? Thank you, and we look forward to hearing the entire presentation when it comes back for funding, and welcome. I appreciate you being here. Well, notice we didn't say yes yet, so it's easy.
So we have a number of fire trucks that are included in the waterfall. This follows the matrix that we provided for apparatus replacement, essentially every other year. We're on a replacement schedule for fire pumpers when they reach 12 years. Sometimes we are a little bit over that, but that is based on the condition, quality, reliability of the pumper at the time that we make the request. But we try to stay within that time frame so that we don't have back-to-back years of apparatus being purchased. We do have, and you will see that there is an inflation number built into our estimates, and that is a 3% increase between each year, and that's based on experience in the industry. Obviously, that can be impacted by the price of steel, which is the main driver of any inflation that might be built into the number. But right now, it is based on 3% increase.
Chief, is it true that because of the way some of these vehicles are now manufactured, the newer vehicles, we're actually not getting as long a service life out of them as...
So there are some legacy apparatus that are vintage, early 50s, mid 50s that are just tanks that are very simple, mechanical systems, no computers, no computer aids, no computer overrides that make them very reliable. And they're far simpler than the equipment that we're operating today. We are getting, with our maintenance, with a very aggressive maintenance, and we've been before the board requesting money to replace frame rails, as you recall. We make those determinations. Our goal is to get 25 years of service life out of our apparatus, 12 years in front line and 12 years. Our system relies on an additional 12 years of service life as a reserve.
That's my point. It's getting more difficult, right? Because
it is very difficult. Yeah, there's no doubt. The amount of rust and the technology that's built into the system is very expensive to maintain. It goes back to my discussion about the maintenance division and looking for opportunities to be more creative and doing some of that heavy lift on apparatus maintenance long term.
Okay. We'll go to Mr. Walsh.
Chief, in looking at the schedules on why are most of the trucks in non-recurring capital, but in 2027, 28, under capital, there's Rescue 1? It seems to be the only truck that appears on that entire schedule.
It's
It's over $1 million.
And if that's
Maybe
the
it's
case,
a
then
million.
you would have 2 trucks in 2 consecutive years.
It's just driven by $1 million, right?
Is
Go
it
ahead.
just because of the?
Different type of apparatus, that's a rescue. You talked about the price difference between that and the pumper that's
Right.
next year.
So it's because it's over $1 million?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So that means 3 successive years, you're gonna buy 788, 1.8,
No,
and
won't-
861. That's Mr. Walsh's point, right?
Yeah, there's actually a year missing 26, so in 4 years, you'll buy 3 apparatus.
Oh, that's right.
Yes, there is a gap here.
Yeah.
And again, we are projecting what the condition of that vehicle will be,
That
you
might
know,
be flexible.
8 years from now.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And it's very difficult. At this point,
Understood.
it would mean 2 vehicles, a pump and a rescue. There's not 2 pumps back-to-back.
Yeah.
There's a pump and a rescue that would butt up against each other.
What did we just buy?
Ladder truck.
We just bought a ladder truck.
And is that's not, we haven't received that yet?
No,
right?
it's under construction right now.
Right, because are we down to 1 ladder truck right now?
Yes, we are.
How, that's pretty dangerous
So
for us
that
at this
will allow us to, so when that apparatus comes in, we have invested quite a bit in maintaining our existing 2004 ladder truck so that it will get that 12 years of reserve life. So we will have a frontline ladder truck, a reserve ladder truck, and the Quint that we purchased for Station 1.
Right. Yeah.
With respect to maintenance, if you could refresh my memory, we have a full-time engineer?
So we have a master mechanic and an assistant mechanic that operate at Station 2 on New Jennings Road that handle all of our fleet maintenance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing none, I think that wraps up the town side departments in terms of new equipment. Thank you so much. I'm going to take a 5-minute break for the members of the board, and then we'll have the Board of Education just come up and talk about their projects, and we'll go from there. How's that sound? Do we have a schedule? Through the new projects for the Board of Education. Number 1, I want to thank you for your patience this evening. It wasn't my intent to have you be here this late. These meetings tend to take on a life of their own. 1 year, this meeting lasted an hour. This year, we're into hour number 3 or 4 already. We thank you for being here. We thank the members of the board, Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Vitale, for being here, and the administration. Welcome to your first time doing this with us. And I'll turn the process over to you, and what we're going to do is go through the new projects that you have in here, and we'll take it from there. So feel free, gentlemen. Or Mrs. Vitale, if you're leaning it off. I don't know.
So I don't, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Is it on?
Is it on? The green light is on, yeah.
Okay, so the first thing you're going to have to do is, please tell us how to pronounce your last name.
You or me? Oh, I'm sorry, Papa George.
Papa George,
Just
just
the way
as
it's
it's
spelled.
spelled. Okay,
Yep.
very simple. Well, welcome, Mr. Papa George. I know you've been around a little while, and we welcome you. I just wanted to make sure I had it right as we go
Yes,
forward.
that is correct. So I think jumping right into it, you'll see that there's not a lot of new projects on this list for this year. There's a lot of change in increase and decrease in pricing for this year. And I can start by telling you that the old regime used a 2 or 3% increase throughout the years. However, we did not change that this year. What we are doing is working with all of our contractors and vendors to put more accurate pricing and using their best industry practices to escalate out over the years rather than relying on us picking a 2 or 3% increase. We're relying on our contractors and our engineers to say, based on best practices in the industry, this is what it will cost in 3 to 5 years or going out forwards. You'll also see that this is a 10-year waterfall and it only goes to 9 years. We did not include the last year yet. Being new in this position, we're looking at all the projects and evaluating and seeing if things need to be moved around with a fresh set of eyes and a new group looking at it. So that's what you're seeing there now. That being said, a couple of the increases you'll notice on there is the 500,000. So the Ward High School air conditioning for the cafeteria.
Can you tell me what page we should
Now,
be
what
looking at?
document are you on?
I'm referring to the summary document, which is probably the easiest to follow, and
Got it.
it has
Thank
all the
you.
notes to the far right side,
Yep.
and it indicates whether it was an increase in red or a decrease in green or a move, and the yellow is the highlighted year that we're on.
Got it, thank you.
So the Ward High School cafeteria is probably one of the bigger ones. It's a $500,000 increase. Again, working with our engineers, they've escalated that 500,000 from $1 million to 1.5 million to do that project. Is their best estimated cost for that. That is one of the big ones, and then the second big one you'll see there is the Walter Fitzgerald project, which is a purchase and project combined into one kind of project overall. You'll see that we only have a one-year lease with Walter Fitzgerald, which ends at the end of this fiscal year. So we reached out to Walter Fitzgerald to talk about renewing the lease moving forwards, and that's when they approached us if we would be interested in purchasing the building.
Just from the diocese,
From
St.
the Bridgeport
Emery's.
Diocese.
Yeah.
St. Emery's, yes. So I guess this was asked of them a few years back, maybe about 8 or 9 years ago, and they, at that time, were not interested in selling the property. And now, since then, they've approached us on selling it. So we took what they had the building estimated cost as, and we had an evaluation done. So we have our own evaluation, which tells us what the building is worth. And we also turned around and looked at the building and said, if we were to purchase it, what would we need to do right away to the building? So included in that $5 million project is a window project, an abatement project, a roofing project, and a painting project to bring the building up to more of a nicer look and a better situation for the school that's in there now.
Now, just as an FYI, it's my understanding, having gone to some meetings, my parish is being impacted by, there's going to be a merger of St. Emery's and Holy Family. And I think that everything is kind of up in the air right now. So there's this property, and then there's the Holy Family School property. I think it's a fluid situation. I don't know how that's going to play out.
So we reached out to the Archdiocese, and we spoke about Holy Family as well, and they said at this time they are not looking to sell that. They have some long-term leases in there, and they feel that with the long-term leases, they should be able to sustain that building under their guise.
Okay.
So they have no interest at this point. However, they do have a big interest in selling this one. I'm not really sure why, and they've actually, I don't know, you probably know more than I going to the church meetings, but they said that if we did not purchase it, we couldn't guarantee the length of how long they would hold on for it for, and they may look to sell it. So it may end up turning into condos if we don't move on it.
Okay.
So that was something they
Of the
gave us.
two buildings, which is the more preferable building for you guys? Do you know?
I know that based on what Mr. Cullen filled me in his notes from touring Holy Family versus where we are now, I know the school likes where we are now better. It's a nice situation. It's a dead-end road. It's quiet, and there's work to be done, but not a ton of work to make it suitable for us. Again, that $5 million covers a lot of what we would need to do right away. And again, that $5 million is also up for state reimbursement for some of the projects like the roof and the windows, and even the abatement could be done as a project. And there's even a possibility of the actual cost of the building itself coming before the state for some reimbursement. It's highly unlikely, but it is possible to put it out there and see what we can get back on it.
Okay.
Other than that, you'll see a bunch of decreases, which are what we were shooting to do with our better pricing. Our elevator replacement has gone down. Our music rooms, our Fairfield Ward High School music suite HVAC rooftop replacement unit, we had an engineering company come out and evaluate that unit. It was on the waterfall, but after they came out and looked at it, we spent a minor amount of money on it, and we were able to take it off the waterfall because they felt that at this point it's not at the end of its life and it should last us several more years. The emergency generator at Ledlow High School has a cost decrease on it. The Roger Ledlow Middle School cooling tower has another cost decrease on it. And the Mill Hill HVAC BMS control system, which was on the waterfall, we were able to move into the actual Mill Hill project.
Right.
So we were able to move that off the waterfall. Cost of Byron Street is an addition. Walter Fitzgerald is deleted as a roofing project because we rolled it all into one project with the $5 million.
Where's the totals on here and the difference year over year? So here
The gray line at the bottom gives you the total for the year. So for the 2021, it's $8,684,046.
and really, those are the only years you've adjusted, so you've left the out years alone. at
We've
this
left the
point.
out years alone until we can get better numbers on it. We were encouraged to do that by looking at just this year's and seeing all the decreases and adjustments we were able to make just within this short amount of time.
But this would imply that you're not moving any of the priorities, that you're maintaining the.
At this time, we are doing that. We are actually looking this year at the facilities plan itself to extend
Right.
it out and look at what needs to be done and what projects can be moved around. I know there's some talk about some window projects that may be jumping from one school to another and then moving around that way, but nothing that we're at this point anticipating adding to the waterfall chart.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to confirm, as I always do, these numbers tie directly to your overall numbers?
Yes.
Are there other questions here regarding these projects? Yes. Who's got a question? Chris, go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I'm surprised to not see any ECC numbers on here this year. And I see some numbers for next year. Is that purely based on the fact that, I guess I'm asking the chairman of the Board of Ed, or I'll ask anybody, it doesn't matter. Is that primarily based on the fact that there's not a real plan for ECC yet, or that the ECC plans this next fiscal year don't include any capital stuff?
Right now, we're waiting for Malone and McBroom to get back with us for some redistricting plans, and there's a couple of different scenarios of possible locations for the ECC. So there is not a definite plan in place, which is why we did not include money for any sort of capital improvements at any particular school.
There's some money next year, right?
There's some money next year with the anticipation of if they should stay at an elementary school. We were looking at Holland Hill and North Stratfield, that there would need to be some work done at those schools to accommodate the ECC. Some site work, potentially outside for a bus loop, just some renovations within the building, air conditioning in the buildings, if they were to stay in one of the elementary schools, the two elementary schools.
Okay.
So right now, that is just, that'll get fleshed out more once we have a location for where it will be, and we should have information from Malone and McBroom within the next month or so. Correct, Mr. Cummings?
So just refresh my memory. Today, as ECC stands today, it's still Fairfield Ward and Stratfield School?
That is correct.
Okay. And Stratfield didn't need any capital work, apparently, or was that already accomplished?
Stratfield, they had, the big thing for the ECC, they have the air conditioning already, they had the bathrooms in the classroom, so we did not need to do any capital improvements to the building. In order to accommodate, they did some moving around of classrooms within the building just to make that section of the school sort of like its own little wing. But, you know, if it moves to a different school that doesn't have air conditioning or needs,
Like North Stratfield?
like, you know, swim rooms in like North Stratfield.
Yeah, right.
And in some of our discussions about the ECC, you know, having a separate location for drop-off and pickup was something that parents had expressed an interest in, being that kids are possibly coming in for services, and we didn't want to have you know, parents walking through an elementary school, so trying to kind of have a dedicated entrance for the ECC, which is available at Holland Hill, one of the side doors, and North Stratfield. There's a back entrance that possibly could serve as an entrance for the ECC, but that would require some site work in the back of the building just for access to the buses.
Yeah. I'm just
No, just
Nothing this year is
Yeah.
the capital for ECC?
nothing this year.
Okay, great, thank you.
The projections that are in this book, then, these are the old projections, not, obviously not the new projections from McBroom,
Correct.
right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Oh.
Any other questions on projects? Go ahead, Mrs. Lefkowitz.
You said that you were working with vendors to get a more specific number. I'm curious if you had done the math. Is it really outside the range of the 2 to 3 or well under, or do you have any sense?
We don't really have a sense at this point. We've just started working with them.
Okay.
Anybody else? Oh, sorry.
I just make, just, as you know, during the budget season, we shared that we were looking to hire an outside contractor to evaluate the HVAC needs in all of our schools. That, once that work is done and once that information comes back, that could possibly impact the waterfall and the timing of future projects, and hopefully give us a better sense of what the costs will be for some of these improvements. I know just from Sherman, the renovation now, the AC cost came at higher than originally projected for Sherman Phase 3. So just a little warning that if the next time we're in front of you, things move around a little bit, it may be due because we are trying to fast track some of the HVAC improvements into our schools. And we talked about this during the budget season, and I think that as we move forward and the approach that we want to take, and it's a dialogue I think all town bodies have to have together, because it will be expensive, especially when we're talking about air conditioning both high schools fully.
And the lighting projects, LED, use of sustainable products, so that the offset in the cost and the energy and all that?
Yes, we work with an escrow company that basically like UI, and they're covering the net costs of doing the upgrades. We've been identifying schools and moving forwards with that.
Okay. Anybody else relative to these projects?
If you want, I can mention, DPW mentioned working with the escrow company we've been working with Mr. Mayor and working with the same company to put out the RFP together so that our schools will be covered in that as well as town buildings.
Great.
That's good. Thank you for that. I think you guys are done. And I thank you so much for being here and for waiting. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of your night, what's left of it. All right.
You too.
All right. Let's go on, Mr. Mayor, let's go back to the schedules and just take a look at how this thing ties out all together.
That Exhibit 2 did what I hoped it would do, is put all the projects in front of you where you could see them, as opposed to all those loosey-goosey, difficult schedules to read, and so we could talk about those. So now we're on to Exhibit 3. Which you've seen the last couple of years as well. Are we there yet? All right. So you see the fiscal year, the anticipated budget. The budget's accelerated at 2% per year. Obviously my default number. Then we have, now you got the town debt payments in the third column there. And then you have the debt payments as a percentage of budget. And then, though you haven't seen any WPCA numbers yet, given the PCA activity, that is the fifth column there. You can see where we start having payments to be made, and really not significantly until 2022. And then you see the percentage of the budget. So we stay well below the 10% throughout the. If we do 100% of these projects at the interest rates that we have projected.
So in the next 3 years, Bob, we remain relatively flat as a percentage of budget on our debt service, and then we begin to de-lever as compared to budget.
Right.
Okay.
And I think we're reasonable on the interest rates. I think we have like 2.5% to 3% going forward.
But this obviously, we have a history of our estimates are a bit low. There's things that come up. So even though we're saying we're de-levering here, to your point, we have some headroom. but we're probably not going to be as low as these numbers at this period of time.
Very possible, right? Something.
Right.
But then again, this is every project, and
Understood.
yeah, exactly.
Any other questions on Exhibit 3? All right, seeing none, let's go ahead, Bob.
Go to Exhibit 4, and it shows you what the outstanding debt will be. Again, this does not include WPCA.
Right.
So you can see that we kind of stay within the ballpark, right around that $200 million mark, $190 million mark. Exhibit 5 has a lot of numbers on it. It's just which ones have been reduced, which ones have been increased, which ones are new.
So we've gone up by about $1.8 million year over year.
For the
changes.
The changes, yes, for the changes. But for the new, it's obviously $41 million.
What do you mean? I'm sorry, I don't understand that. Oh,
Well,
yes.
yeah.
There's $42 million worth of.
We got $1 million in savings, and we got $9 million in increases. We threw in the books, the Duck Farm Bridge construction, the radio system, the turn, and then we got $41 million in new stuff.
Yeah, I misstated that.
Yeah. And then you got the reductions. Table 6 kind of lays it all out. If you look at the middle row there where it says grand total, the total of the 10 years last year was $429, right? $429 million. The total 10 years today is $487 million, for an increase of $57 million total.
And what are the big drivers
Debt
there? Is
service.
that $24 million?
Well, you got the $24 million one. You got a couple of $8 million ones. Yeah, got some.
Those are the big
yeah.
ticket items.
Golf course on there?
Pardon?
The golf course?
What do you mean?
Bond on there? Is that one of the reasons?
The marina's on there. The
Clubhouse.
clubhouse is on there. Yeah, it's everything's.
It's a $24 million one for the pumping station,
yeah.
and then it's the $8 million for the marina.
Yeah.
And then it's another couple ones.
No,
Go ahead.
I'm wrong. The clubhouse is not on here because it's not new or increased or reduced. Well, it says reduced.
Well, it's not the different, yeah, but it's not part of the difference between the 429 and the 487.
Right.
Right.
Right, I mean,
Right.
there's a marginal difference of a few $100,000 to $1 million, but it's not, or a couple $1 million maybe.
So then you might want to just, and the rest is detail. You might want to jump ahead to Exhibit 9.
Bob, what's the, before we do that,
Yes, sir.
let's take a look at, so we're on Exhibit 6, right?
Yes, sir.
Help me, so on the left-hand side, we're looking at the grand total of 429 versus 487 for the increase of 57 million. What's the right-hand side again? So you're saying that's the year over year?
That's the difference between the 10-year total. Oh, when you're looking at the grand list, but the difference in the when
I'm trying to tie
above
those.
that is year by year.
Yeah, so I'm trying to tie, how am I to look at the left-hand side of the page in comparison to the right-hand side? You see what I'm saying? Because I've got 429 versus 487 for a difference of 57. That is the entirety of the next 10 years, correct?
That's correct.
So when I look at 107 versus 140 for a difference of 33, what is that?
Where
It's at the bottom. Your sheet's different. At the bottom of the sheet, Bob, see where it says September, October?
Oh.
That's the year, the
yeah, that's
difference from last year.
that's the year over year.
Okay, but why is that?
See, if you go back to the
Because the left-hand side, wait a second.
If you
for a
go
second.
back to the
No,
exhibit,
this is
exhibit
this,
1.
Hang on, Bob. Is that because the left-hand side that I'm looking at is the actual capital plan, and the right-hand side, or debt service, and the actual capital plan is the right-hand side? Is that? Am I comparing debt service to capital projects?
Yes.
Capital plan.
Okay, so what's interesting here and where this is going to fall apart is the town's over by 42 million. The Board of Ed's under by 9.8. coming to the reduction of 33. Now, God bless the Board of Ed by coming down by 9.8, but that's not going to hold.
That's right.
Because they're already signaling they want to do air conditioning, right?
Yes, that's gonna,
That's going to blow this number out.
And they're not looking out the same amount of years you're looking out. 'Cause didn't they just say that tonight, that they didn't do a full 10-year?
they have almost no projects after 2024.
Yeah, I mean, the town side, and I
Just
don't
as
mean, I
an
don't mean to
incomplete
disparage
picture.
the Board of Ed, but the town side seems to have done a better year projecting out those 10 years. Board of Ed kind of falls off a cliff like year 4 or 5-ish, right? Well, I know,
No,
but
no,
I'm saying,
no, but
but
they
I'm
don't
saying
have
that that's, when you look at when you're comparing the numbers, so you're like, oh my God, the town went up 42 million, and the Board of Ed went down. You know, it's like comparing a 5-year plan to a 10-year plan.
It's apples and oranges. You're exactly right.
I'm not disparaging. I'm just saying they don't have that visibility or
Right.
that longer look that the town side has done.
It's true. So anything 5 years greater is incomplete.
Just different.
Yes. Yeah, they only have 4 projects in the last 5 years.
So going back to the commentary about delevering, we're not going to be delevering. Already we know that. Because that delevering comment came about 4 to 5
Oh.
years out.
Right, but if you go back to that numbers, if you go up 4 to 5 years out, we get down to, 4 years out, we're down to 846.
No, I get it. We're done.
Yeah.
Right, and then we fall down.
And then we fall down, but that's gonna jump back up.
That's going to jump back up, and we still don't know what's going
Right.
on with the DP.
But that's what I said, that was, we're
WPCA.
still under the 10%, I think comfortably.
Let's hope. I don't know, what's the headroom for the Board of Ed then? Because if they start adding in air conditioning and stuff like that, right, and then you have the WPCA project, you're actually going to be bumping up against that headroom.
Yeah, well, yeah, then you have to go to the far right corner on that column, Exhibit 3,
Exactly.
which has the,
So look at this. Here, let's play this out, this scenario, just because this is exactly what this meeting is all about. We get to 2025, which is from the Board of Ed perspective, they stop. They say they're not doing anything, right? They've gone 5 years out, they're stopping at 2025, right?
Yeah.
Then we're at 8.21, 7.44, 7.37, 6.4, 6.84, 6.29, without what the Board of Ed wants to spend. Because
Correct.
they stopped. So that's having 0 for the Board of Ed. They're not going to be at 0. And then we have the huge WPCA project. So we don't have nearly the headroom that we think we have 5 years out from here.
yeah, but the numbers you're reading include WPCA.
Understand,
Right,
but but they've been,
Yeah,
due respect, they've been off by a howitzer, right? The only thing I know for sure is it's not the number that they put in here, right?
there were valid reasons for the 3 projects, but,
I
yeah,
understand,
yeah.
but,
Yeah, I got you.
so, I mean, we do not have the headroom 5 years out that we think we have. And that's got to be communicated to you guys at the Board of Ed, because that's going to be a binding factor here.
And
Right.
and God forbid the state starts asking us for something in those years.
Correct?
I mean, you're still in 2025, we're at 8.2%.
And you also know what's going to happen in those years is the reimbursement from the state is not going to be there, so our debt
Well,
service
that's-
is going to go higher.
That's right, too.
And that's also keeping at the budget at 2%.
Right.
I mean, if the Board of Ed starts coming in with the increases they start coming in with, and that projects out, it's gonna bring the number lower. There's gonna be more room.
Yeah, there's going to be more headroom.
There's gonna be more.
Right.
Credit card's gonna grow.
Yeah. Yeah, this is, you guys have to go out another 5 years to see what the headroom is. Thank you for sticking around, but I mean, truly, because do you see what we're doing? We're trying to say beneath 10% of the budget, and we're having, the factors are, and this also doesn't include the firehouse stuff we were talking about. It doesn't include a fulsome discussion of WPCA, and then 6 years out, it doesn't include the Board of Ed. So I do start to get concerned now when I look at it in that
Few
picture.
qualifiers there.
Yeah, big qualifiers, right? I mean,
Yeah, not small numbers, right?
yeah. Is everybody, are we all, yeah, all right. What else? Mr. Mayor?
Well, I think we jump to Exhibit 9, I think, because the next few pages, there's a lot of detail. And you might even want to go to Exhibit 10, which has it by year, what the WPCA looks like. 2020, $11 million, 2021, $4 million, 2022.
What exhibit, Oriana, I'm sorry?
10.
That's 10.
That's 10.
It's after all that detail.
Yeah. Right, and this is when we start to get into it big time for the, what do we refer to it as, the hardening project?
System upgrade.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is total renovation.
It's a system upgrade. The
yes.
hardening was a much smaller project.
Right.
What, how much is this one gonna cost? I mean, what do they have in here in total, do you know?
If you look on the right-hand column, it's $90 million of improvements.
Where? I don't see it.
Exhibit 10, right-hand column, 90 million minus 16 million in reimbursements,
See, I don't
$74 million
No,
total.
I screwed that up, Tom.
Oh, you screwed it up.
Screwed
Okay,
up
I'm
that
looking
top
at
part.
something.
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's why I'm not following the number. There it is.
Yeah, I screwed up that top part. My apologies.
Bob, is this 90 million a bigger number than what we had in there last year?
Yes, I think it was 83 last year.
So in a year, we've
recollection.
gone up by $7 million.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the three projects that I know the most about, right? The Eastern Turnpike Pumping Project, which
Yeah.
is it's a total different project. So it's not like the project changed.
So that's
It's-
included
that-
as part of this change.
That's
though.
included. So that last year, that was 2 million. This year, it's 5.2.
So I guess the point is this 90 million is not all that system upgrade. This 90 million includes ancillary projects.
It's
that-
$7 million for the hardening, which last year was in there at maybe 3 or 3.1, I
Right,
think.
exactly, right.
So that's 7.4. And then the lower East Trunk sewer line was in there at 2.2, which is in there at 4.836.
So we're closer to like 80 or 76 or something like that related to the actual system improvement then, if that's the case, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, if you look, you can see the detail in Exhibit 9.
Yeah, last year total was 65.5.
The net total? The net.
In Exhibit 10 last year, the total cash flow was 65.5.
Yeah, the net. So it's 10 million. Yeah, that's what I said 9 earlier.
Yeah, it's
but
about $10 million
Yeah,
difference.
exactly.
$11 million change,
Yeah.
right?
But this is, and Mr. Carey's still here, but yeah, I mean, these numbers, I mean, look, we got that $46 million number there, $58 million number gross, right, for the plant upgrade. You know, there has been some work done on that, but I wouldn't bet money on $58 million.
Right, well, that's my point, right? I mean, that number's not a hard number right now.
Right.
Which goes back to the earlier discussion over what's our headroom on.
Yeah, but I think there's some engineering input in that number, right?
Brian Carey, Interim Director of Public Works. So the plant
We know
facility.
who you are.
The plant.
It's not the RTM.
The plant upgrade. The plant
We're gonna
upgrade
get to
is
a
moving
nameplate.
to design, which you would see basically that $6 million in there. They're holding roughly 30 million, and then there's another 58 million. So the number that I've heard kicking around and talking with Wright Pierce is like 70 million. But again, a large portion of that is reimbursable through the Clean Water Fund.
So is your 70 million analogous to this 58 million, Brian?
So there's 58 and then there's 29. But again, there's
Where's the 29? I'm sorry, I can't get there.
I'm sorry, it's 58 million. 29 is what they're anticipating in 2021. But this is still a couple years out. We haven't even gone to design for this.
That's
So,
my point, right? Yeah.
And
So we don't know what, in fairness, you don't know what this number's going to be.
No.
Right. Do you know whether this is a conservative estimate or it's just an estimate?
Probably middle of the road.
Right, so there's some potential to get hit here.
But again, that money's, there's a large chunk of that's reimbursable, so it depends. I mean, I can have Wright Pierce come here and discuss that.
Well, I don't want to jump. Look, I want you guys to be able to do the work and come back to us. We just need to be cognizant of the overall that we don't have the headroom we think we have.
So the RTM approved the hardening project, which was last night.
Yeah.
Which was the biggest time crunch one, just because of the grants associated with that. We were worried about losing the $3.3 million. There's not really grants associated with the other two projects that are currently under design. Obviously, time frame is still pretty important on those, but everything else is, it can be stretched out a little bit. We haven't gone to design on some of these other projects.
Okay. Anybody else? Seeing none? Thank you, Mr. Carey.
Thank
Do we have
you.
any other questions on our capital planning right now? The follow-up items, I think the firehouse item is a big item. And I do think expanding the Fairfield Public Schools item so that we could get a stronger look at what that 10 years, that last 5 years projection, Bob, I think it's going to be critical, particularly if people are coming before us with these large items in the next few months. We need to know the context besides.
Yeah, we'll see if maybe we can put some interim document together.
That'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So, I'm sorry, did you just say we're going to ask the Board of Ed to flesh out that air conditioning program?
Well, they're going to do that themselves, but
Right.
we really need them to flesh out. They've given us what the next 5 years look like, but not what the next 10 year looks like.
Oh, yeah.
And the issue is we're trying to plan here what the headroom is.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Anybody? Thank you. To our members of the RTM, thank you for coming. Our members of the Board of Education who were here earlier, and the Education Administration, all the department heads. Mr. Tetra, thank you for being here this evening. Welcome back to our table.
Nice to chat with you.
Do I have a motion to adjourn? I'll take it from Mr. DeWitt. I'll second it from Mr. Walsh. All in favor? All opposed? We're done, everybody. Good night.